In a shocking twist of fate, the most powerful and ruthless king from a dystopian world is reborn as a helpless newborn in a medieval Isekai realm. The moment he opens his eyes as a newborn, he finds a man and woman smiling down at him like proud parents. They're staring at him with love in their eyes, saying how he looks like both of them, and celebrating the arrival of their newest family member. The father, Reynolds, decides to name him Arthur and immediately tries to get the baby to call him Papa. The mother, Alice, laughs and says he's still way too young for that. While the two of them goof around with their new child, Arthur is just lying there confused. He has no clue who these freaking people are or why they're acting like they're his damn parents. If they're telling the truth, then that means he died in his old life and somehow got reborn with memories intact. Gazing up at the starry night sky, Arthur can hardly believe that after his countless victories and ruthless world domination, the Supreme Being has reduced him to a feeble infant. It's humiliating, and the worst part, he has to burp like a baby now, and the second-hand embarrassment is unreal. It's not that he hates this new life. His parents are caring, and they seem genuinely happy to have him, but that doesn't change how uncomfortable he feels. Diapers are annoying, and there's always this nagging fear that someone might try to hurt him while he's helpless, so the only thing he can do to stay on guard is to clench his tiny fist. Reynolds sees this and smiles, thinking it's adorable. He slips his finger into Arthur's little hand and calls Alice over to show her how much their son loves him. Arthur, meanwhile, is still struggling to move, and in the middle of all that effort, he accidentally poops himself. Now his mom has to deal with it, and the shame hits so hard that he almost tears up. He just wants this absurd dream to be over, but it's not a dream, it's real. And this is the new life he's stuck with. Still, things take a strange turn when Arthur notices something unusual. Reynolds suddenly uses magic to boost his strength. Just like that, his body surges with power, and then Alice steps in, using healing magic on him like it's second nature. Arthur's never seen anything like it. Magic didn't exist in his world, so watching it happen right in front of him is fascinating. He wants to understand it, but for now, he knows he has to grow up first. Later, Reynolds heads into the forest and takes down a beast using his strengthening magic. Not long after that, a few of his friends show up to hang out. Back to our baby hero, since there isn't much else for him to do, he starts analyzing everything around him. He pays attention to every little detail and soaks in as much information as possible. Because if there's one truth that holds across every world, it's that knowledge is power. Reynolds eventually returns home after his hunting trip, and Arthur finds himself wondering whether this society allows everyone to carry weapons. If that's the case, then it must mean the outside world is dangerous enough to make it necessary. That only confirms to him that he needs to get stronger fast because adapting is his only option. There's so much he wants to ask, but his body isn't ready for that yet. Still, in the middle of all his frustration, there's a part of him that feels happy. His new parents give him moments that feel pure, something his old life never allowed. In his previous world, Arthur never even had the luxury of sleeping peacefully. Assassination attempts came with a job, and every night was another risk. But now for the first time, he feels something close to peace, and little by little he gets used to it. After days, weeks, and perhaps even months pass, Arthur learns to crawl, and the first thing he does is head straight for a mirror, just to check how handsome he looks. Once he gets used to moving around and has full control of his body, he starts sneaking out of bed whenever his parents aren't watching, and his destination is always the library. He picks up books one by one, eager to learn more about this world. That's how he finds out that the continent he was born into is called Decathan. Decathan is made up of 3 kingdoms: the Dark Kingdom, where the dwarves live; the Eleanor Kingdom, hidden deep within a forest and ruled by elves; and finally, the Sapin Kingdom, where humans reside, including Arthur himself. Although Arthur's nation is a monarchy, its throne is inherited, unlike his previous world, where power could be seized by killing the reigning king. Once he's got the basics down, Arthur shifts his focus. He wants to understand magic, so in a surprisingly cute way, he reaches up and pulls a book on the subject from the shelf. The further he reads, the more he starts comparing this world to his old one. His past life was more advanced, more industrial. This one is simpler, but the presence of magic, or as this world calls it, mana, changes everything. According to the book, mana isn't something just anyone can use. It's passed down through generations and only appears in about 1 out of every 100 people. There are only 2 main forms: augmenting, which enhances the body with mana, and conjuring, which enables one to project and manipulate energy in endless ways. While reading, Arthur recalls the healing magic his mother used earlier, and it clicks. She's clearly a conjurer, According to the book, everyone with mana has a mana core, and most spellcasters only learn to tap into it around puberty. Once they master that, they can become full-fledged mages. Arthur thinks it sounds an awful lot like the concept of Kai, something he knew well in his past life. Yet he remains skeptical about whether this arcane knowledge will serve as an effective weapon for him. Still, he decides to try, so he focuses and channels whatever remnants of his Kai he thinks he still has, and just as he starts feeling something shift, Alice swoops in out of nowhere, picks him up like the precious baby she believes he is, and takes a good look at him. At first Arthur panics, thinking she's caught on to what he was trying to do. But no, it's worse because she announces that he's pooped himself, and the stench confirms it. As Alice takes him to get cleaned up, Arthur lies there in silent agony. He's sick of being trapped in this weak body, and the humiliation is endless. He swears to himself again that he needs to gain power and fast. Later, Alice spends some quiet time journaling his milestones. She's genuinely proud of how quickly he's developing, but one thing still bothers her. He hasn't smiled, not even once. And that thought hits her harder than she expected. She looks out the window, eyes landing on Reynolds outside, swinging a wooden sword with Arthur in his tiny hands. Reynolds calls out to her, beaming as he brags about Arthur's progress. But instead of being impressed, Alice is pissed. She storms outside and scolds him loudly, saying it's way too soon for their son to be handling weapons. Reynolds tries to explain, but it's no use. Alice doesn't want her baby playing soldier just yet. In contrast, Arthur absorbs every detail of the scene, using his parents' interactions as a framework to comprehend the complexities of marriage. Though he begins to wonder if perhaps in this strange new world, women might be the ones really in charge. Later that day, Alice takes Arthur to the market, and everything there blows his tiny mind. Every corner, every sound, every item feels like a brand new piece of information, especially when half this stuff didn't even exist in his old world. He even gets to witness magic being used up close, and that alone makes the whole trip worth it. Then, on the way home, as sleep gradually overtakes him, Arthur reflects on how much his family has supported him. They finally make it back home, and Alice carries Arthur straight to his room. On the way, she talks softly about how proud she is whenever he sneaks out of bed just to read, or how curious he gets every time they go to the market. She's convinced he inherited those traits from Reynolds. Then she chuckles to herself, saying he might grow up and run off to explore the world, but deep down, she hopes he gets to live a quieter, safer life. That evening, Arthur sits nearby and watches Reynolds practice magic in the yard. At first he's excited, thinking he finally has someone to learn from firsthand. He watches as Reynolds lifts a few small rocks with his magic, and that makes Arthur change his mind. But before the disappointment sets in too deep, Alice shows up behind him and assures him Reynolds is just warming up. She tells him to keep watching, and sure enough, Reynolds amps up his mana and starts pulling off some serious moves. Watching all this, Arthur quickly figures out that his father is an augmenter, someone who uses mana to enhance his physical strength and skills. That gets him fired up, and he starts imagining all the cool tricks he could pull off once he gets his own mana core. But just as he's getting into the fantasy, Alice scoops him up and tells him it's bedtime. On the way to his room, he spots a book on the shelf and immediately starts pointing at it, whining for her to let him read. She tries to resist, but after a few seconds of watching his adorable face light up, she gives in and lets him read it for a bit. As he flips through the pages, he reminds himself of everything he's learned so far, every little step that might help him form his own mana core. He closes his eyes and starts drawing mana from every part of his body toward a single point. He works diligently, and just when his parents assume he has already fallen asleep, a loud explosion rocks the house. Without hesitation, Reynolds throws himself over Alice and takes the blast across his back. Burned in daze, he quickly checks that she's okay, and when she nods, they both remember Arthur. They run inside, and what they see nearly stops their hearts because Arthur is floating in midair, and he is calmly descending like it's nothing. In that heart-stopping moment, the roof above begins to crumble, and being just a child, Arthur is unable to dodge in time, yet his parents leap into action, shielding him from what could have been a fatal collapse. Overcome with relief and emotion, all three burst into tears, and for the first time, Arthur feels the warm, unyielding love and protection of his parents, a stark contrast to the cold loneliness of his past life, and that realization moves him to tears for the first time. The story then shifts to Arthur's previous life, where he once held the throne as King Grey. During his reign, a servant from the royal court was caught conspiring to end his life. By royal decree, such betrayal demanded swift execution. Yet, instead of bloodshed, the council chose a more restrained judgment, banishing the traitor along with his entire bloodline to their native land. The traitor knows full well they'd face something far worse than death once they arrived, so he gets panicked and desperate, and dropped to his knees and begged Gray to show mercy and spare his wife and daughter. But Gray, without even a word, killed them right in front of him. It wasn't revenge. It was a twisted act of mercy because he knew death by his hand would be quicker than whatever hell awaited them where they were going. And somehow, the assassin Broken and Hollow genuinely thanked Gray for it. Now in his new life, Arthur has just turned 4. He's spending time with his father Ray, who gives him a pair of combat gloves, exact replicas of his own. But Arthur politely turns them down, saying he'll stick with his wooden sword for now, because he thinks that with his small frame, the gloves would shorten his range and make it harder for him to fight properly. Ray doesn't push it, and instead he smiles and steps into their regular sparring match. But today turns out to be different. In the middle of the fight, Arthur surprises Ray by imbuing his sword with mana, something he's never shown before. And with that sudden enhancement, he easily disarms his father. It's the first time Arthur has ever beaten him, and Ray is left frozen, stunned by how fast his son is advancing. Later that evening at dinner, Ray brings up the idea of hiring a proper instructor for Arthur. He's realized that his own training won't be enough anymore. But Alice is immediately against it because she knows hiring a tutor means sending their son away to the city all alone at just 4 years old. Ray stays firm, pointing out that Arthur can now use magic to enhance physical objects, and that kind of talent can't go untrained. The conversation quickly turns into a heated back and forth, both parents standing their ground. To stop the argument, Arthur jumps in with a compromise, and he suggests they all move to the city together. That way, Ray gets to give him the education he needs, and Alice doesn't have to be separated from her son. It's a perfect solution, and both parents agree on the spot, so they immediately start packing for their new life in the city. In a few days, Ray's old adventurer crew, the Twin Horns, arrive personally to escort Arthur and his family to the city. Arthur politely introduces himself to the group, so their leader Adam introduces himself and tells him that they've already met before, though he doubts a little kid like Arthur would remember. But Arthur remembers every detail because it was the day he accidentally blew up their house. The Twin Horns then came to help rebuild everything, and Arthur overheard the whole conversation, learning that his mom and dad were once members of this very party before they settled down. Once Adam finishes talking, Angela sweeps in and pulls Arthur into a bone-crushing hug, nearly squeezing the life out of him. Durden, the party's tank, notices the kid silently panicking and gently pulls him away from her grip. That's when Arthur catches sight of someone watching him from the roof of the carriage, a quiet girl with an unreadable expression. Her name is Jasmine, and she doesn't say a word, just keeps staring at him. Arthur for a moment gets completely lost in her eyes, until Helen strolls over, shakes his hand with a bright smile, and introduces both herself and Jasmine on her behalf. Then, with the introductions over, the group sets off on their journey to Xyris City. During the ride, Arthur can't help but think how outdated this transportation is compared to what he knew in his previous life, where flying vehicles were the standard. Still, he doesn't really mind, not when his loving mom is sitting right there beside him, chatting away and making the trip feel like home. They take plenty of breaks along the way, and during one of those stops, they're suddenly ambushed by a pack of wild wolves. For the first time, Arthur sees up close how brutal the outside world really is. But Jasmine reacts first, stepping in without hesitation. She leaps into action, daggers flashing, taking the monsters down like it's nothing. Then Ray, Adam, and the others quickly jump in to handle the rest. Arthur doesn't join in, he just watches, and the whole scene fires him up, so he's determined to fight beside them one day. That night, they all gather around for dinner, but Arthur notices something strange. His mom hasn't touched her plate. She says she's already full, but something doesn't feel right. She then spots a wound on Ray's arm, so she instantly walks over to heal him, and the moment she starts casting the spell, the energy in the group changes. Everyone suddenly becomes tense, quietly scanning the area, shielding her from any wandering eyes. It's then that Arthur starts putting the pieces together. Healing magic isn't just uncommon here, it's a huge deal. And the real reason his family had been living way out in the middle of nowhere wasn't just to live quietly. It was to keep Alice's rare healing abilities hidden from the world. After the meal, Adam pulls Arthur aside, curious to see firsthand if Ray's been exaggerating his son's abilities. The rest of the party is just as intrigued by the so-called prodigy, so they gather around to watch, turning what was supposed to be a quiet moment into a full-blown spectacle. Arthur, still just 4 years old, silently wonders if anyone's the least bit concerned about him getting hurt. But this will be his first time facing an opponent other than his dad, and unlike Ray, who only used a practice stick, Adam shows up wielding a real spear, but even if it's wrapped in cloth to dull the edge, it's still a proper weapon. The match kicks off without delay. Adam channels mana into his spear right away, and Arthur instantly responds, infusing mana into his body too. But he doesn't stop there. He surges magic into his legs, boosting his speed to a whole new level. In a blink, Arthur launches forward, slipping right between Adam's legs and landing a clean hit before springing back to create distance. The crowd goes silent, absolutely stunned by his lightning-fast movement and spot-on precision. As the duel heats up, they clash again, but this time head-on. But it becomes painfully obvious that there's still a huge gap in sheer power. Arthur doesn't have the muscle to keep up, and Adam's next blow sends him flying. The force behind the strike throws him through the air like a ragdoll, and right then, Arthur gets a harsh reminder. This small body of his just isn't built for direct hits. But before he slams into the ground, Angela swiftly casts wind magic to catch him midair, gently lowering him to safety. Durden then immediately steps in and scolds Adam for going way too hard on a little kid, and he reminds him they were supposed to be sparring, not trying to launch Arthur into orbit. Adam raises both hands in apology, admitting that he got a little too into it, but only because the little monster's technique totally threw him off guard. So he asks Ray what kind of damn brutal training regimen he put this kid through to make him this dangerous at just 4 years old, but Ray says that he doesn't do shit. A few steps away, Arthur notices Jasmine staring him down with that unblinking intensity of hers. She bluntly asks how the hell he fights like that and demands he teach her. And judging by her completely deadpan expression, Arthur realizes she's not going to drop this until she gets what she came for. The following morning, the group resumes their trip and eventually stops at a calm, open stretch where Arthur can squeeze in some more training. Adam takes this chance to give him some spear lessons, while Ray flexes his dad bod with some old school workout poses, and the poor kid just humors him anyway. After that, Helen steps in for a quick archery session, and before long, Arthur's nailing bullseyes like he's been doing it for years. With training wrapped up, it's finally Jasmine's turn. She'd been waiting for this moment, and surprisingly she picks up on his teaching quicker than expected. Later that evening, Arthur is quietly reading a book when Jasmine starts staring at him like she's been hypnotized by a face that doesn't even try to be charming. A few minutes later, it's not just a stare, it's borderline stalker behavior. The next morning rolls around, and it's Arthur's birthday. Jasmine, of all people, gives him a dagger as a present. To everyone's shock, especially the other girls, she even goes out of her way to explain how to properly use it. Adam, being the only single guy in the group and having clearly had enough of this rom-com moment, loudly declares that it's time to hit the road. That's when Alice calls Arthur over. But just as she does, she clutches her stomach and clearly looks like something's wrong. Arthur sees right through her weak smile and asks what's going on, but she brushes it off, insisting she's okay, even though the way she says it doesn't convince him one bit. As they continue on their peaceful journey, it is suddenly interrupted by a full-on bandit ambush. Without wasting time, everyone hops off the carriage and braces for a fight. Then a hail of arrows rains down, but Angela steps up and throws up a magic barrier to protect them. Arthur then peers outside and quickly realizes they're surrounded from all directions. Meanwhile, the bandit leader, who frankly looks like his head got squashed into a cube, orders his crew not to kill the women and children because he plans to sell them off for a nice chunk of change. The bandits then charge with zero hesitation, and though Alicia is visibly shaken, she tries to keep Arthur calm. Then before the attackers get too close, Durden blasts a few of them back, and Ray meets them head-on, knocking thugs out left and right. One nearly lands a blow on Ray, but Helen's arrow intercepts him straight through the chest. Adam also tears through enemies with his spear like a hot knife through butter, and Jasmine takes down her share with clean, precise dagger strikes. Watching the twin horns fight like this, Arthur realizes just how strong each one of them really is. But the problem isn't skill, it's numbers. The bandits just keep coming, wave after wave, so eventually the group begins to tire, and the pressure builds. Then with a brutal hit, Ray gets slammed into the carriage and collapses, motionless. That's when the bandit leader, with his smug face and evil smile, starts making his way toward Alice and Arthur. Watching Ray laid out like that, Arthur and his mom instantly jump out of the carriage in a panic. But before they can get closer, Ray regains consciousness and tells them to hold their ground. He may be bruised and barely standing, but he's still trying to play the hero. He turns to Arthur and tells him to take his mother and get out of there fast. Of course, Arthur, being the stubborn little guy he is, insists on staying and fighting alongside them. But Ray cuts him off and finally says the words that stop him cold. Alice is pregnant. That one sentence answers every question Arthur had about her recent weakness, and suddenly everything clicks. With no time to waste, Ray looks him in the eye and says he trusts Arthur to protect both his mother and his little brother she's carrying. So Arthur snaps into gear, grabs Alicia's hand, and takes off raining like hell. Behind them, the bandit boss, loudmouth and still full of fight, shouts at his crew to stop them. But just as they're about to catch up, Ray charges into the fray, giving Arthur and Alice the seconds they need. At the same time, just as it looks like Arthur and Alice might be caught, knives fly through the air, and it was Jasmine and Adam who stepped in to clear the path like pros. In moments, the whole Twin Horns crew is locked in battle again, holding off the attackers while Arthur and his mother escape. As they flee, Arthur thinks back on the life he once had, the life of a man who had taken countless lives without flinching. And now here he is, terrified of losing someone he actually cares about. The irony of it twists in his chest, so he clenches his fists. But there's nothing his tiny body can do but keep running like hell. Suddenly, Arthur senses something, danger from above. He glances up and spots a shady figure on a ridge, preparing to launch a spell. Acting fast, he shoves his mother out of the way. The blast nails him squarely, knocking him off balance and sending him tumbling off the cliff's edge. As he falls, he refuses to go down alone, so with his last ounce of focus, he reaches for the dagger Jasmine gave him. The blade is tied to a cord, so he hurls it upward with precision, and it wraps around the enemy's leg, dragging the caster down with him. Meanwhile, Durden and Angela try to save Arthur using their magic, but he's already too far out of range. As he plummets, Arthur reflects on everything. Then he looks up at his mother, her arms outstretched, reaching for him like she could somehow pull him back. Her eyes fill with panic, her face streaked with tears, because the idea of losing her son makes her heart break. But Arthur otherwise is glad that he could protect his mom, even if it costs him everything. Still, part of him wishes he'd gotten the chance to meet his little brother. But then, against all odds, we see at night that he did survive the fall. Gasping for breath, bruised and dazed, Arthur opens his eyes and finds himself face to face with an enormous, terrifying beast calling him by his name. And just like that, a new nightmare's only getting started. Arthur then panics the moment he lays eyes on the towering creature standing over him. He has no freaking idea where he is, and the way that thing's glaring at him, it feels like he's 2 seconds away from becoming lunch. Figuring it's now or never, he goes in for a sneak attack to try and get the upper hand, but the creature just smacks him aside like he's nothing and tells him to calm down. Says it's not some evil beast, and just wants to be friends. But let's be real, last time a stranger pulled the Let's Be Friends card, someone ended up in the back of a van, so let's just say Arthur's trust levels aren't exactly high. Anyway, the kid's still a mess because his body's beaten up bad, and he's not getting better unless he eats something. So the creature casually plucks a bunch of fruit growing from the cave walls and tells him to eat up. But he hesitated. Wall fruit didn't exactly scream safe to eat, and he was already suspicious. So Arthur tried to get up and talk his way out of the situation, but the second he moved, a sharp snap echoed from his body. So he collapsed back to the ground, overwhelmed with pain, and just started crying. The monster just sighs and tells him to quit whining. Honestly, it's a miracle he even survived that mountain drop. Arthur wanted to ask questions, but the creature made it clear it wasn't answering anything until he ate. So with no better option, Arthur grabs one of the fruits and takes a bite, and to his surprise, it was actually pretty good. That he wolfing down handfuls like they were candy. And once he's full, he turned back to the creature and asked if it knew anything about his parents or what happened after the attack. The creature explained that it couldn't leave the cave, but it had a special ability to observe the outside world. To prove it, it projected a screen in front of Arthur showing him that his parents had defeated the bandits and left several days ago. So Arthur's eyes welled up again, but this time for relief that his parents were alive. He thanks the creature for showing him, and since he was going to be stuck here recovering for a while, he decided to stop being so hostile. The creature introduced itself as Sylvia, and despite how terrifying she looked, she turned out to be gentle and kind. Then over the next few days, Arthur remained in the cave, eating and resting while his body slowly healed. Sylvia stayed by his side the entire time, watching over him without asking for anything in return. And once Arthur was finally full recovered, the only thing on his mind was getting back home, but Sylvia quickly shut that idea down. According to her, there's no way Arthur would make it on his own. The cave they're in is right on the edge of Elshire Forest, and that part of the forest is crawling with dangerous magical beasts and the kind of bandits that make the ones who attacked his family look like amateurs, so if he tries to leave now, he's not going to make it. But that doesn't mean he's stuck here forever, because Sylvia explains that she has the ability to create a dimensional rift, something that could teleport Arthur to a safer location, maybe even all the way home. but the problem was it would take her a long time to generate it. So until that portal's ready, he's got no choice but to wait. With nothing else to do, Arthur grabs a stick and starts swinging it around. If he's stuck here anyway, might as well get in some sword training. Days pass, and although he still doesn't know much about Sylvia, he's grown to enjoy her company. All he really knows is that she looks like a terrifying monster, and she's clearly hiding from something or someone. But despite everything, she's one of the kindest people he's ever met. After another round of training, Arthur takes a break. He walks over to a flat rock, sits down, and starts working on channeling his mana. Sylvia watched for a while, quietly impressed. He was just a kid, yet he already had a mana core, but from the way he was going about it, it was obvious he hadn't received proper training. Without a word, Sylvia lifts her hand, and suddenly, a swirling mass of mana gathers in her palm. Arthur's jaw nearly hits the floor because it's not just that she's casting a spell, it's the fact that she's gathering mana while she's casting. So if he could learn to control mana like that, there's no doubt he'd become incredibly powerful. But before he could ask her to teach him, Sylvia stopped and looked over at him. She wanted to know what he planned to do with that kind of power if he learned it. Arthur hadn't really thought about it before, but now that she brings it up, one memory burns in his head. Those bandits. How close they came to killing his family. How powerless he felt. So without thinking, he tells her flat out, he'll use that power to wipe out anyone who dares to hurt the people he loves. Sylvia didn't like what she heard, and without a word, she walked over and flicked Arthur on the forehead, knocking him back, and tells him straight that she'd never teach that technique to someone driven by thoughts like that. Arthur sat there, holding his head, still not understanding what the problem was. Because to him, after what happened to his family, wanting to protect them by any means felt right. Sylvia wants to make something clear, so she gently presses a single finger against Arthur's forehead and calmly tells him she could just as easily crush his skull with it, or touched him with care like she just did. Then she asked him which one he'd rather experience. Obviously, Arthur chose the gentle touch, so she explained that anger and hatred are easy paths to walk, but once you start down that road, it never ends, it just consumes everything. She didn't want that for him, and she didn't want him to waste his life chasing revenge, so she asked again what would he do with this power? Arthur took a moment, and this time, instead of thinking about the fear and violence he faced, he pictured the faces of the people he loved, the ones who made him smile, and with that image in his heart, he answered that he wanted strength so he could protect them. So Sylvia smiled because that was the answer she'd been hoping for. But elsewhere outside the cave, another creature was drawing near, one that looked an awful lot like Sylvia. It had been tracking her, and now it was close. Back in his old world, Arthur had been a king, but not in the way most people imagine. The senators held the real power, and he was just their weapon. A pawn used to wage wars and silence enemies, and that life had left him hollow because he hated being used like that. Back in the present, Sylvia was helping him shape a different future. She began teaching him her technique, showing him how to draw an ambient mana and condense it. Arthur followed along, and after a few tries, he managed to pull in the mana and use it to boost his body. The power was incredible. He could feel it pulsing through him. He ran to Sylvia, full of excitement, ready to thank her. But then everything shifted, and Sylvia's eyes narrowed because she sensed something. And without even a damn warning, she shoved Arthur into a pile of rocks and whispers for him to stay hidden and quiet. Arthur peeked through the cracks and spotted another creature approaching, a massive beast almost identical to Sylvia. Sylvia clearly knew him, and from the way she tensed up, Arthur could tell this wasn't a friendly visit. The stranger didn't waste time and demanded Sylvia come with him, but she refused, so without another word, the other beast launches an attack. Arthur wanted to jump in, but he suddenly heard Sylvia's voice in his head. She told him to stay back, and she would handle this. The other dragon tried to reason with her one last time, said he didn't want to kill her, but would if he had to. But Sylvia's answer was clear. She would rather die on her feet than listening to his freaking voice. She then unleashed her full power, and in that moment, Arthur saw her true form, a dragon pulsing with energy. And in this form, she can unleash everything she's got. Sylvia then launches a massive blast straight at the other creature. He manages to block it, but tells her she's being reckless because if her body in this condition, using that much power will kill her. Sylvia already knows that, but she just doesn't care because she's lived a long life and has no regrets. Then with one strong push, she slams the other monster into the wall. But he's not down for good, and he gets right back up and starts hammering her with a barrage of magical blasts. She takes the hits hard, but right now she's more concerned about Arthur. This battle is getting way too close to the place she stashed him. The enemy then fires off one last heavy shot, and she can't dodge it without risking Arthur's life. So she draws on every last drop of power and freezes time itself. While everything is frozen, she tells Arthur to come out from hiding, and he listens. It looks safe enough, but he's full of questions, especially after seeing that she's actually a dragon. Still, there's no time for answers because her time-freeze spell is running out fast, and she needs to move him now. She opens the dimensional rift she had been building, but since she's injured and never got the chance to finish the spell properly, the portal connects to some random place instead of his home. She really didn't want to dump him in the forest, but at this point, there's no other choice. Even so, she trusts Arthur. With what he's learned from her, she believes he can handle himself and make it back on his own. But before she sends him off, she asks him again what he plans to do with his power. Arthur doesn't even pause and tells her that he'll use it to protect the people he loves. That answer puts her at ease, and she's glad he finally understands. Before he goes, there's one last thing she wants to give him. Sylvia conjures an egg and a single feather, placing them gently in front of him. She asks him to wrap the egg in the feather and keep it safe no matter what. Then, with the last of her strength, she transfers her will onto Arthur's body, marking both of his arms with strange glowing symbols. Arthur looked down, stunned by the sudden appearance of the glowing marks because they stretched from his shoulders to his wrists, like full-sleeve tattoos, pulsing faintly with mana. But Sylvia doesn't have the energy to explain what they mean, and she simply tells him that one day he'll understand how to use them. But by then, she won't be around to show him how. Sylvia also apologizes to Arthur, because the truth is, she could have sent him back to his family the moment he showed up, but she was just enjoying his company so much that she didn't want to let him go. And now, because of that selfish choice, she ended up putting him in danger. Arthur feels awful because he knows there's nothing he can do to save Sylvia from dying here, even after everything she taught him. He doesn't care that she's a dragon, or a monster, or whatever else people might call her because he sees her as family. He tells her she feels like a mom to him, but Sylvia gently reminds him that he already has one. So Arthur smiles and says she can be his grandma instead. Sylvia didn't see that coming, but the moment he says it, her heart melts, so she asks him to say it again, and he does happily. Sylvia's heart breaks knowing she won't get to see him again, but time is running out, so she gently nudges him forward toward the portal. Arthur gets it, so he picks up the gifts she gave him and walks toward the rift. But at the very last second, he turns around and tries to coax her into coming with him. Sylvia doesn't budge because she can't, so she shuts the portal and sends him away. Time then unfreezes, and the enemy's blast slams straight into her. The hit looks devastating, and Sylvia crashes to the ground. But the other monster isn't convinced she's dead. He knows she's way too powerful to go down from just that. He steps in closer, lowering his guard. But it's a big mistake because as soon as he's in range, Sylvia summons everything she's got left and lets out one last attack. The blast wipes him out, along with everything around him for a full mile. As Arthur gets pulled through the dimensional rift, he hears Sylvia's voice one last time. She asks if he remembers what she said about how power should be used, and Arthur does. But his heart is heady, so Sylvia tells him the world's a sad place, and stuff like this is going to happen. But that's exactly why he needs to change it. Arthur protests because there's no way he could ever pull that off, but Sylvia isn't expecting him to change the world overnight. One step at a time, that's all it takes. Besides, this isn't his first time shaping a world, and she knows who he used to be. Sylvia is aware of his past life as a king, and while she didn't agree with how he ruled back then, she believes that as long as he doesn't lose himself to hate, Arthur can become the kind of king this world actually needs. Then a little while later, Arthur wakes up on the ground, dazed and aching, but one thought is burned into his soul: he's going to keep his promise to her. But first, he's got to figure out how to get out of this damn forest. But suddenly, he hears something move behind him. And suddenly, a chilling scream cuts through the silence of the woods. It's high-pitched, panicked, and unmistakably from a young girl. And without wasting a second, he surges mana into his legs and launches himself in the direction of the cry. He vaults up into a tall tree to get a clearer look, and sure enough, down below, he spots a gang of filthy bandits yanking a terrified young elf girl through the underbrush. She tried to escape, but they've already got her, and one of them has his hand clamped over her mouth to shut her up. And since she's an elf, they're planning to sell her on the black market for a huge profit once they leave the forest, so they tie her up and toss her into the back of their carriage like cargo. Watching all this shit, Arthur is hit with flashbacks, memories of the moment he and his family were attacked by bandits too. He remembers hearing those bastards talking about keeping him and the women alive to sell later, and it makes his blood boil. His first instinct is to slaughter every last one of them for what they're doing, but then Sylvia's voice echoes in his mind, reminding him to keep his anger in check. He closes his eyes, takes a breath, and regains his focus. Charging in now could get the girl killed, and he knows it. So he holds back, watching and waiting for the right moment to strike. Once the bandits all pile into their carriage and start heading out of the forest, Arthur silently follows, sticking to the shadows. By the time night falls, they've stopped to set up camp since it's too dark to keep going. Arthur sits nearby, hidden, still debating whether he should trail them until they reach a town or just take them out here. But then he overhears one of the scumbags talking about how elves are his favorite and how they should get a taste of her before selling her off. That's it. Arthur knows he can't let this go on, but it's not quite time yet because he still needs full cover of darkness before making a move. So he closes his eyes and starts meditating, getting himself ready for all the blood he's about to spill. Once it's dark enough, Arthur opens his eyes, fully focused, and starts mapping out his plan. He then spots a few horned wolves chained up nearby, which is strange because no way wild beasts like that would obey humans willingly. A closer look reveals they've been forced into submission with enchanted collars, and Arthur figures he can use that to his benefit. So he picks up a few acorns and tosses them at the wolves to stir them up. The wolves' howling draws the bandits' attention, and their leader growls at one of his men to hurry over and shut those freaking beasts up. The unlucky bandit drags himself up and heads over, kicking one of the wolves hard in the neck to silence it. But in that exact moment of distraction, Arthur makes his move. He summons a mana blade, leaps down silently behind the bandit, and in a swift, brutal strike, cuts the man down where he stands. Arthur quickly grabs the guy's weapon, and just as another bandit comes over to check out the noise, Arthur jumps onto his back and slits his throat clean. That makes 2 down, but Arthur's body is already running low on steam, so he knows he can't drag this out for long. Then another bandit shows up to see what's taking so long, and Arthur rushes him, trying to land a clean kill. But he misses the vital spots, and the guy manages to scream, blowing Arthur's cover. The leader catches on fast and realizes the attacker is a mage kid, which means this fight just got a hell of a lot more complicated. Still, he doesn't want to kill the kid, not when selling a young mage on the black market would be worth way more than the elf girl. He starts channeling magic into his arms and charges in swinging. Arthur leaps back and throws a kick to counter, but the guy dodges it with ease. Arthur tries to throw him off by hurling his knife, but the leader catches it mid-air and turns this move against him. He slams Arthur to the ground and grabs him by the ankles, lifting him up just to mock him. He laughs, telling Arthur there's no way a kid can beat an adult in raw strength, and Arthur knows he's right, so he stops trying to match power with power, and he switches back to magic. He blasts the fireball straight at the guy's knee, and while he's screaming in pain, Arthur drives the knife straight into his skull. Only one more to deal with, the wounded bandit from before, and Arthur wastes no time finishing him off. Then he heads straight for the carriage to check on the girl. She's still blindfolded, completely in the dark about what just happened. Arthur gently tells her it's okay now, the bandits are gone and she's safe. Her name is Tessia, and as Arthur helps her out of the carriage, he tells her she's free to go home. But then Tessia spots the blood on Arthur's hands and immediately starts panicking. Arthur figures it's normal, any kid would freak out after seeing that much blood. Letting her see the full aftermath might not be a great idea, so he tells Tessia to wait right there for a bit, then walks off to cover all the bodies before she sees them. Tessia then asks Arthur what happened to the ones who took her, and Arthur doesn't really want to tell her he slew them, so he just says they ran into a bit of an accident and won't be a problem anymore. The girl doesn't press any further, so Arthur grabs her things from the bandit's carriage, hands them over, and says goodbye because he still needs to make his way home. But before he can walk off, Tessia grabs his arm and begs him not to leave. She's terrified of being alone out here, scared she'll get eaten by some tree ghost or worse. Arthur asks if she at least knows the way home, and she says she does, kind of. She knows the general direction, but not how long it'll take to get there. Arthur really doesn't want to go off course, but he also knows there's no way Tessia survives out here on her own. So in the end, he agrees to walk her back to her village. He glances over at the wolves the bandits were keeping and considers using them to speed things up. But he's got no clue how to actually control a wild wolf, so he figures they're better off left behind. Tessia though says they should at least take off the magic collars so the wolves can go free. Arthur warns her that taking them off could get her attacked, but Tessia isn't too worried. She hasn't hurt them, and as someone who lives in this forest, she feels responsible for helping the creatures that live in it. She ends up removing the collars, and sure enough, the wolves quietly walk off into the woods without causing any trouble. By the next day, Arthur and Tessia are already on the move, heading toward the direction of her village. After walking for a while, they stop to take a quick break and grab a bite to eat. Arthur cooks up a simple stew and tells her she's gotta eat because they still have a long way to go and she'll need the energy. Tessia makes a face because the stew tastes and smells kind of weird. But hey, Arthur's no gourmet chef. The whole thing is just dried meat and salt boiled together. Not exactly 5-star, but it's better than starving. While they eat, Tessia asks why Arthur came to Elshire Forest in the first place. It's not every day a human, especially a kid, shows up around here. Arthur explains how he got separated from his family and ended up wandering into the forest. Since they're already on the subject, he asks what it's like living in the kingdom of Elenwar, and Tessia lights up. She says she loves it. Her parents are always busy with work, so she usually spends most of her time hanging out with her grandfather and the family servant. They keep moving along the path, but since Tessia has no clue how far her village actually is, it's tough to say how long this trip's going to take. And to make things worse, one of those wolves she let go earlier has been quietly trailing them ever since. Arthur's seriously starting to regret not just taking them all out back when he had the chance. That night, Arthur decides to stay outside the tent and keep watch. If that wolf shows up, he wants to be ready in case it tries anything. But a little while later, Tessia peeks her head out and asks Arthur to come inside and sleep. He tells her he's not tired and he'll stand guard out here, but she's clearly too freaked out to be left alone. She begs him to come inside with her, and after a little back and forth, Arthur finally gives in. He figures he can still keep watch from inside the tent anyway, just to help her feel safer. Tessia's trying to act like she isn't scared, but it's obvious, especially since she insists that Arthur stay right next to her the entire time, even when they're taking their shit. Before she falls asleep, Tessia asks him something random about the human kingdom. She wants to know if it's true that all humans are perverts who marry a bunch of wives. Arthur's caught off guard and asks where she even heard that shit, and she says it was her grandpa who told her. Arthur admits some nobles have their own harem, but most humans are actually pretty decent. Tessia seems satisfied with that answer and turns over to go to sleep. Luckily, the wolf never showed up that night, so by morning, Arthur and Tessia packed up and got moving again. Over the past few days, Tessia's really started to open up to Arthur, and now that the trauma of the slave traders is fading, she actually seems happier. Still, she's totally useless in the wild. She can't even cross a small creek without help, so Arthur ends up having to carry her across like a sack of flour. Then out of nowhere, Arthur clutches his chest in pain. It hits him like a wave, and he has no idea what's happening. Tessia freaks out and runs off into the woods to find some herbs that might help. But Arthur's pretty sure this isn't some random sickness. He props himself up against a tree, barely holding it together, and that's when the same wolf from before shows up. Arthur immediately tenses up. If it attacks now, he's completely screwed. Just as things start to look bad, Tessia comes running back with the herbs, and Arthur warns her to keep her distance in case the wolf lashes out. But instead of attacking, the wolf casually walks up and drops a dead pig right in front of him, then turns around and walks away. Arthur just stares, totally thrown off. Tessia guesses that maybe the wolf was just trying to say thanks for letting it go free. That evening, Arthur and Tessia set up camp and sit down to enjoy some roasted meat by the fire. It's a major upgrade from the bland stew they had earlier, so Tessia is loving it. While she was out searching for herbs earlier, she also found a few mushrooms. She offers some to Arthur, but in hindsight, he really shouldn't have eaten the random forest mushrooms, because now he's dealing with the worst case of diarrhea imaginable. After Arthur's done practically dying in the woods, he's exhausted and ready to crash on the spot. But Tessia keeps talking to him. She starts going on about how her grandfather used to read her storybooks about the human and dwarven kingdoms. Ever since then, she's wanted to visit them, but the elders never let her because elves generally don't trust other races. Somewhere in the middle of her story, Tessia realizes Arthur isn't listening at all. He's clearly too white to focus, so she gently covers him with a blanket and quietly wishes him good night. And by the next day, they get back on the road, but Arthur's chest pain is getting worse with every step. Tessia feels bad for not being able to do anything to help, but Arthur tells her it's nothing to worry about. Trying to change the mood, Tessia asks if she can start calling him Artie, since they've spent so much time together and she sees him as a close friend now. Arthur says he's cool with it, and Tessia's caught off guard by how chill he is. So he plays it up a little, joking that he'll forever treasure the fact that the great Lady Tessia now considers him a friend. That annoys her a bit, and she tells him to stop acting like a brat. Arthur fires back, saying it's rich coming from someone who wouldn't let him leave her side all night because she was scared. Tessia insists that was completely different. Still, joking aside, Arthur realizes something. Tessia is actually the first real friend he's ever had, not just in this world, but even in his past life. He never had anyone get this close. Just then, Tessia spots something up ahead that looks familiar. She calls Arthur over to take a look. He walks over expecting her to show him a cool stick or some weird rock, but instead he finds himself standing in front of a massive tree with a glowing portal embedded right in the trunk. Tessia turns to him, says this is the entrance to her village, and reaches out her hand, asking Arthur to come with her inside. But unluckily for him, the elves still carry a heavy grudge against humans, so the second Arthur steps foot into the elven village, he's immediately surrounded, blades drawn and pointed right at him. He looks over at Tessia, expecting her to vouch for him because she could clear this up in a heartbeat. But to his shock, Tessia just stands there, staring him down with a cold, distant gaze, saying absolutely nothing. Seeing that shit, Arthur's heart sinks because he immediately assumes Tessia lured him into a trap to get him killed, and he mentally kicks himself for trusting anyone again. After all, he's already endured betrayal after betrayal in his past life, so why did he expect this to be any damn different? The guards get ready to behead him while Tessia watches in silence, but she wasn't behind any of this. For some reason, she just didn't speak up earlier, but once she overhears the guards saying they're going to kill Arthur, she finally steps forward and tells them to stop. One of the guards warns her, insisting that this human boy is dangerous, but Tessia firmly states that Arthur isn't dangerous at all. In fact, he's the sole reason she was able to make it home alive. Tessia's words should have been enough to make the guard rethink his actions, but instead, he accuses Arthur of brainwashing Tessia into believing he's trustworthy, so he still plans to kill him anyway. But before the guard can carry out the order, an older man appeared from a magical light and commands them to release Arthur. This man is Tessia's grandfather and the former ruler of the Elven tribe, and his name is Varian. Thankfully, he's much more level-headed, and he chooses to believe Tessia's account of what happened. He even offers Arthur an apology for how they treated him after everything he did to help Tessia. But from their perspective, it was suspicious that the missing princess returned home with an unknown human kid. Arthur's relieved to hear he won't be executed, but he's also shocked to learn that Tessia is royalty because she never mentioned it once during their entire journey. They spent days traveling together, yet she apparently didn't think it was worth bringing up. Right then, Tessia's mother and father appear, having been informed that their daughter had returned safely. Tessia runs into their arms, overjoyed to see them again. And if Tessia is a princess, that means her parents are the king and queen of Eleanor. But unlike Varian, they're not as forgiving because the moment Tessia's father lays eyes on Arthur, he demands an explanation for why a nasty human has set foot in their kingdom. So he immediately orders the guards to seize Arthur and execute him without delay. However, no one moves a muscle. Tessia's father may be the reigning king, but Varian already told the guards to leave Arthur alone, and nobody dares defy Varian. Varian then steps forward and informs the king that Arthur is the boy who rescued Tessia and escorted her home safely, so they can't treat him like a common criminal. Tessia also demands that Arthur be welcomed into their palace as an honored guest, but her father hesitates since allowing a human to enter the elf kingdom, let alone the royal castle, is strictly forbidden by tradition. But rather than endure a tantrum from Tessia, he reluctantly agrees to grant Arthur the respect of a proper welcome. Now that the misunderstanding has been cleared up, everyone prepares to return to the castle. But before they leave, Varian quietly tells Arthur that he wants to speak with him later in private. Arthur feels a bit cautious around Varian, sensing just how powerful the old man truly is, but he doesn't have much time to dwell on it because Tessia grabs his arm and excitedly pulls him along to show him around. It's Arthur's first time setting foot in the Elven Kingdom, and he's completely captivated by how different everything looks compared to the human lands. But the deep prejudice against humans is still painfully obvious because every elf they pass stops what they're doing to stare at Arthur as he walks alongside Tessia toward the palace. Still, no one dares say anything offensive since Arthur has officially been declared a royal guest. Tessia is the only one treating him warmly, but in the back of his mind, Arthur keeps wondering why she waited so damn long to speak up when the guards were about to execute him. Suddenly, the sharp pain in Arthur's chest returns, worse than before, but he still doesn't understand what's causing it. Once they arrive at the castle, Tessia is welcomed by her attendants, and she orders them to look after Arthur with kindness and respect, regardless of his human status. With that settled, she turns to Arthur and asks if he'd like to come play with her. But Arthur tells her he first needs to speak with her parents because he figures they'll want to hear exactly what happened to Tessia and how they managed to get back home. They all then make their way to the audience chamber, with Tessia tagging along since she refuses to be left out. And since they're about to have a serious conversation, Tessia suggests bringing in some treats to enjoy while they talk. It feels more like a casual tea gathering now, but there are still important matters to discuss. Tessia's father then takes the opportunity to formally introduce himself. His name is Alduin, the reigning king of Eleanor, and his wife's name is Muriel, and his father is Varian. Arthur then presents himself modestly as a simple boy hailing from a humble village in the kingdom of Sapin, fully acknowledging that someone like him, a human, would typically never be granted permission to enter Eleanor, much less stand before the royal family, so he expresses his deep gratitude for their hospitality. Alduin raises his eyebrows, impressed that Arthur speaks with such maturity despite his young age, but more critically, he demands a thorough explanation of what transpired with Tessia and how she ended up missing. Arthur proceeds to recount the entire ordeal, describing how he became separated from his family during a raid by bandits and ultimately found himself lost within the elven forest, though he deliberately omits his encounter with Sylvia inside the cave. He continues, explaining the moment he crossed paths with Tessia, clarifying that he stumbled upon her as she was being abducted by slave traffickers. Alduin's face twists in fury at the revelation that humans dared attempt to sell Tessia into slavery, but Arthur calmly points out that elves too have participated in the slave trade, so it isn't a crime exclusive to humans. Setting that aside, Varian turns to Arthur, asking how exactly he managed to free Tessia from the slave traders, and Arthur simply explains that he eliminated them all. At this, one of the guards erupts in disbelief, shouting that there's no conceivable way a mere child could have taken down slave traders alone, but Varian swiftly silences him, warning him to hold his tongue unless he wishes to forfeit his position. Arthur shows no signs of deceit, leading Alduin to reluctantly state that he believes him. Now that everyone is clear on the events, Arthur takes the opportunity to present a request. As he already mentioned, he ended up stranded in the forest after the bandit attack, so he politely asks if they would assist him in returning home. Alduin clenches his jaw in outrage at the boldness of a human asking the elven royal family for a favor, but considering Arthur went out of his way to escort Tessia safely home, it's only right they repay his kindness. Furthermore, if Alduin refuses, he'll inevitably have to face Tessia's inevitable tantrum, something he's not eager to endure. Eventually, he sighs and agrees to help Arthur, but explains that the teleportation gate leading back to Sapin is sealed and can only be activated once every 7 years during the summit of the 3 tribal leaders. Since the last summit took place 2 years ago, Arthur will have to wait an additional 5 years before the portal becomes usable again. Arthur isn't keen on waiting that long, and Alduin equally dislikes the idea of having a damned human remain in Eleanor for 5 entire years, so he states that he'll arrange for a squad of guards to escort Arthur back to Sapin. He wants Arthur gone as soon as possible, but since it's already quite late, he allows Arthur to stay the night in the castle and depart the following morning. Arthur expresses his gratitude to Alduin for agreeing to help him return home, though the ache in his chest is intensifying and Varian quietly takes note of Arthur's condition. A short time later, Arthur's room is prepared inside the castle. He finds himself soaking in a bath, yet the throbbing in his chest keeps worsening, leaving him anxious that something serious is happening to him. After finishing his bath, he steps out onto the balcony to breathe in some fresh air, hoping it might ease the discomfort. The cool air offers a bit of relief, but he knows he needs to get to the bottom of this pain before it escalates into something dangerous. As Arthur gazes upward, he spots Tessia alongside her parents standing on the balcony above, and watching them together stirs thoughts of his own family. He still has no damn idea whether Ray and Alice survived the ambush by the bandits, but he trusts in their strength because they've always been tough, so surely they managed to escape somehow. Even so, he deeply wishes he could talk to them right now. At that moment, Tessia notices Arthur below and senses that he looks troubled. Once she finishes her conversation with her parents, she goes to find him. When she finally reaches Arthur, she apologizes for the cold way her father treated him, but Arthur assures her that it doesn't bother him. He understands why Alduin would act that way after all decades of conflict between elves and humans have left deep scars, and it's only natural he'd struggle to trust a human, especially one connected to his daughter. Speaking about parents makes Arthur reflect again on how distant he feels from his own, and he confesses his fear that they might not be happy to see him. After all, the entire reason they went on this journey was for his sake. Maybe they'll blame him for everything that happened. He also holds himself responsible for failing to protect them during the bandit attack and for getting separated. But before he can spiral deeper into guilt, Tessia grabs his face and shakes his head gently. She doesn't know much about Arthur's parents, but if they're anything like hers, she's sure they'll be overjoyed to see Arthur again when he finally makes it home. At that moment, the hallway lit up with dozens of brilliant fireflies, and surrounded by the glowing lights, Arthur found himself trying to remember the smiles of his parents. Ever since he had been reborn into this world, they had never once given him any reason to feel unloved. So why was he suddenly afraid that they'd despise him after everything that had happened? He had allowed the scars from his past life to cloud his thinking and fill him with doubt for quite some time now, and he had even gone so far as to suspect Tessia might betray him earlier. But looking at her now, all he could see was a pure-hearted girl who would never harm her friend. Suddenly, Arthur sensed something flying straight toward Tessia, so he caught it instantly and powered up his mana, ready to strike at whoever had attacked her. But to his astonishment, the one who had launched the attack was none other than Virion. Arthur couldn't believe Virion would stoop so low as to attempt to harm his own granddaughter. But Virion calmly explained that he'd never intended any harm to come to Tessia because the objects he had thrown were nothing more than a few fireflies, harmless even if they made contact. Still, he admitted he was impressed by Arthur's lightning-fast reaction and counterattack. Virion's reason for pulling this stunt was simply to test if Arthur had truly possessed the strength he claimed to have used to defeat the slave traders, and it was clear now that Arthur had been completely honest. Tessia then hurried over and pleaded with Virion to stop teasing Arthur. But that wasn't the real reason he'd come here. He had noticed something peculiar about Arthur earlier, and he wanted to test it out with a friendly duel to gauge Arthur's true abilities. Virion then conjured a sword for Arthur using magic and gently lifted Tessia out of harm's way so she wouldn't get injured. Arthur accepted the challenge, sprinted forward, and swung his blade at Virion, but Virion was simply too quick. Even after Arthur infused his steps with mana to enhance his speed, he still couldn't catch up to Virion. Just when Arthur thought he finally spotted an opening, Virion shattered his sword effortlessly with the palm of his hand. A fragment of the broken weapon flew straight toward Tessia, so Arthur threw the remains of his blade to intercept it, shielding her. Arthur then charged at Virion wielding nothing but pure mana, yet Virion met him with his own aura. Virion's power was vastly superior, leaving Arthur little hope of winning. But Arthur wasn't the type to surrender. Even after being knocked back by Virion's force, Arthur surged forward again and managed to land a clean strike right on Virion's forehead. It didn't inflict any real harm, but Virion was genuinely impressed that Arthur had managed to slip through his guard and land a blow. Virion was eager for another bout, but suddenly Tessia pinched him on the ass and scolded him for picking on Arthur. Arthur assured her that it was alright, admitting he actually felt privileged that someone as formidable as Virion deemed him worthy of a spar. While they were still on the subject, Virion revealed that he wanted to formally take Arthur on as his pupil. Arthur was stunned and asked if Virion was being serious, but Virion wasn't one to make jokes about such things. He directly asked Arthur whether he'd accept the offer. Arthur hesitated, uncertain what to say, especially since he hadn't yet found a way to let his parents know he was alive. Virion told him that if that was his only concern, he knew a method Arthur could use to speak to his parents right away. Arthur was intrigued, but before he could respond, a sharp pain pierced his chest again, and Virion seemed to understand the cause. He explained that Arthur had inherited a beast's will, and unless he agreed to become Virion's apprentice, that beast's power would eventually claim his life. After getting slammed with such devastating news, Arthur tried crashing for the night, but no matter how hard he tried, sleep wouldn't come. The weight of being separated from his family, mixed with the looming threat of death hanging over him, all warped into a hellish nightmare. He ended up stuck in sleep paralysis, pinned down and tormented by a shadowy, demonic presence that clung to him like a curse. Suddenly, he heard someone calling his name. His eyes shot open, and there was Tessia sitting right on top of him. She'd been trying to wake him up for a while, but he kept mumbling nonsense about monsters, and now she was getting seriously annoyed. She told him to snap out of it and hurry the hell up, because Virion was already waiting for him outside, so Arthur sat up and started changing clothes. While he was getting dressed, Tessia asked if he was really planning to stick around and become her grandfather's disciple, but Arthur wasn't sure yet. It all depended on whether Virion could actually help him get in contact with his family. As far as Arthur was concerned, if he could just hear his parents' voices and let them know he was okay, that would be enough. Once he was ready, he and Tessia headed downstairs together, but the moment they opened the doors, they were greeted by the sound of Virion and Alduin locked in a heated argument, because Alduin was completely against the idea of Arthur staying in the Elf Kingdom. Letting Virion taken in as a disciple would be a direct violation of centuries of elven tradition. But Virion didn't give a damn. He liked Arthur, and he'd already made up his mind. He was taking the kid under his wing, no matter what anyone said. Tessia tried to step in and defend Arthur, but Alduin immediately shut her down. He knew she wanted Arthur to stay, and he wasn't interested in hearing her opinion. Funny enough, Virion didn't want to hear Alduin's either. He waved them both off and told Arthur and Tessia to hop in the carriage because they had somewhere to be. The ride to meet Virion's mysterious friend dragged on for so long that Tessia ended up dozing off next to Arthur. At some point, Arthur turned to Virion and asked how much longer the trip would take, but this time he called him Grandpa. That caught Virion off guard, and he chuckled at how quickly Arthur had dropped the formal tone. Still, if things played out the way he hoped, and Arthur did end up living here under his guidance, then yeah, he'd basically be family anyway. Virion didn't mind the casual talk. In fact, it made him happy. Tessia had always been alone. As the only child and the next in line for the throne, most of the other kids stayed away from her. The few who did get close always ended up stabbing her in the back, and because of that, she had trouble trusting anyone. But with Arthur, she was different. Whenever they were together, she looked genuinely happy, and for that, Virion was deeply grateful. Arthur too had his own share of trust issues, but when he looked at Virion, all he saw was a warm, genuine old man, someone who felt more like a real grandfather than most blood relatives ever could. For once, he felt like he could actually trust someone. Eventually, the carriage pulled up to their destination, so Arthur gently woke Tessia, and the three of them stepped out. Arthur was itching with curiosity because whoever this mysterious person was, they had to be a big deal after all. It's not every day someone like Virion goes out of his way to visit anyone. Without wasting time, Virion stomped up to the door and started banging on it like he was trying to knock it off its hinges, yelling at Rinia to come out already. When he leaned in to check if anyone was coming, the door smacked him square in the face. After shaking it off and pretending it didn't hurt, he introduced Rinia as a special kind of mage, one who might be able to help Arthur contact his family. She welcomed them inside so they could get started. Once inside, Arthur looked around the place and was a little underwhelmed. It looked like a regular house, nothing fancy. Just a table with a random bucket of water on it, so he was starting to seriously question how someone like her was supposed to help. Rinia explained that she was a seer, a rare class of mage who could look into someone's past or future. She gave Arthur a quick read using her powers and immediately sensed something strange. Parts of his past were hidden even from her, so that alone told her he was no ordinary kid. Still, she admitted she wouldn't have understood much anyway because seers only catch fragments of a person's story, not the full picture. But Arthur didn't come here to get his past or future read. He had one goal, to somehow let his family know he was still alive. Rinia pushed the bucket of water toward him and told him to focus on his parents, really visualize them in detail. She began channeling her power, and within seconds, Arthur started seeing images, clear as day, of his mom and dad. Alice was in the kitchen, finishing up a pot of stew for dinner. It looked like way too much food for just the two of them. Ray loved that stew, but neither of them could bring themselves to enjoy it anymore, not without Arthur there. For all they knew, he had died the moment he fell off that cliff. The guilt crushed Ray so badly that he nearly spiraled into drinking. But he had to keep it together for Alice. She was pregnant, and they had no choice but to move to the city instead of wasting time searching the wilderness. Once there, Ray picked up work fast. In just a few weeks, he somehow scraped together enough money to get them a house in the city. But no matter how much he earned, none of it meant a damn thing, not without Arthur. Just then, Ray and Alice suddenly heard Arthur's voice. They looked around, but they couldn't see him anywhere, and for a moment, panic kicked in because they thought they were hearing his ghost, but Arthur quickly explained that he was still alive. He told them he was currently living in the elf kingdom of Eleanor, and while he wasn't exactly sure how it worked, thanks to a friend, he was using some kind of special magic to talk to them through this weird setup. He told them he wanted to come home more than anything, but right now he couldn't because there was something wrong with his body, something serious, and unless he fixed it, he wouldn't survive. Still, he swore to them that he'd return as soon as he recovered, though he had no idea how long that might take. He also begged them not to blame themselves for any of this because it had been his choice to make, and if he had to do it all over again just to keep them safe, he'd do it in a heartbeat with no regrets. Ray and Alice were overwhelmed with happiness because just hearing their son's voice again was enough to lift the weight that had been crushing them for months. But for Arthur, saying goodbye again tore him apart. His chest tightened, and his eyes burned with tears, but deep down, he was grateful he'd gotten the chance to speak to them, even if just for a little while. So he made a silent promise to himself right then he'd never let them worry like that again. But to keep that promise, he needed to grow stronger. That's why he asked Virion to take him on as his disciple. but the only problem now was getting Alduin to agree to let him stay at the castle. Alduin was still firmly against it, his hatred for humans too deeply rooted to let go of. But Tessia reminded him that Arthur had saved her life, so if he kicked Arthur out now, the entire kingdom would see him as nothing but an ungrateful savage. Alduin tried to argue one last time, warning that Arthur's presence could stir up trouble in the Elf Kingdom, but Virion had already planned for that. He told Alduin to make a public announcement. Arthur was now officially his disciple, and with Virion's authority, no one in their right mind would dare speak out against it. That was it. Arthur was officially allowed to live in the royal palace. After the meeting wrapped up, Alduin walked over to Arthur and offered him a proper apology for the way he'd acted earlier. He admitted he still wasn't fond of humans, but Arthur didn't seem like the others. He seemed like a genuinely good kid, and more importantly, Arthur had saved his daughter. And as a father, he knew he owed him for that, so he told Arthur that from now on, he could consider himself part of their family. Arthur was honestly caught off guard by how quickly Alduin and Mariel had flipped their stance. But thinking about it, it made sense. With both Virion and Tessia backing him this hard, Alduin had probably just given in to the pressure. Arthur thanked him sincerely, saying it was an honor to be welcomed into the royal castle. But Tessia didn't let it end there. She stepped forward, arms crossed, and said this wasn't good enough. If they were truly welcoming Arthur, then she wanted him to be allowed to play outside with her with no restrictions. And since Alduin had already accepted Arthur, he didn't bother arguing, and he gave them the green light to go ahead. With permission finally granted, Tessia grabbed Arthur by the arm and dragged him out into the town, excited to show him around. Arthur, once again, was blown away by the elegance and beauty of elven culture. Tessia knew this part of town like the back of her hand, and she told Arthur there was a snack shop down the road that sold some of the best treats around. But it was crazy popular, so if they didn't hurry, everything would be sold out. She tugged his arm to get him moving faster, and Arthur followed along with a smile. But just as they were picking up speed, Arthur accidentally bumped into another kid on the street. It was a simple mistake and nothing major, but the kid immediately went off, yelling about Arthur's disgusting human germs getting all over him. Arthur had to stop himself from laughing. He was standing right there, and this little punk had the nerve to run his mouth like that, especially when he was well within punch range. Tessia stepped in and told Arthur to just let it go because it wasn't worth making a scene over something so small. Normally, Arthur would have listened. He would have taken the high road and walked away, but then the brat Ferrith took it a step further. He looked right at Tessia and said she shouldn't be hanging around trash like Arthur, and that she should be spending her time with someone worthy like him. Ferrith was clearly from some noble bloodline, and it was obvious he thought way too highly of himself. Arthur figured if the guy was going to act like a clown, then he might as well be treated like one. So he smiled, pretended to be impressed, and purposely mispronounced his name as Fee-Bitch. Ferrith instantly lost it, so Arthur casually apologized, acting like it was a slip-up. He told him he'd make sure to show the proper respect next time they crossed paths, then turned to walk away with Tessia. But Ferrith wasn't letting it slide. Arrogant as he wasn't completely stupid. He knew damn well Arthur was mocking him, and he wasn't about to let that kind of disrespect go unpunished. So he challenged Arthur to a duel with his precious family honor on the line. Arthur stared at him in disbelief because he couldn't believe the guy was actually dumb enough to ask for a real fight. Tessia stepped forward, clearly annoyed, and told Ferrith that even if he was some big shot noble, this had gone too far. Ferrith brushed it off, saying it was perfectly normal to challenge someone to a duel if they insulted your name. But Tessia reminds him that Arthur is now the student of Virion, and only a fool would willingly pick a fight with the apprentice of the most powerful man in the kingdom. Still, Ferrith was full of himself. He said there was no way he could lose to a human. Then he turned to Arthur and said that if he refused the duel, it would be a disgrace to Virion's name. Arthur is still trying to wrap his head around everything because back in his old world, a duel usually meant someone wasn't walking away alive, so watching some rich kid casually throw around challenge threats like it was recess just didn't compute. But judging by the smirks and chuckles coming from the adults nearby, duels around here clearly weren't death matches, just some flashy public sparring. Tessia turned to Arthur and asked if he was sure about this. Arthur nodded, and he was fine with it. With that, the duel was set, and both sides got into position. As soon as it started, Ferrith charged straight at Arthur with a stick like he actually had something to prove. But as the saying goes, every genius has a plan until they get punched in the damn face. And that's exactly what happened. One clean shot later, Ferrith hit the ground like a sack of rocks, knocked out cold. His friends ran over in a panic, while Tessia, unsurprised by the outcome, calmly grabs Arthur's hand and pulls him along. She still had a long list of stuff she wanted to do today, and getting stuck in some dumb noble drama wasn't on it. The two of them spent the whole day together, checking out shops, walking through town, and just enjoying each other's company. After a while, they took a break and sat on a balcony overlooking the city. Tessia asked when Arthur's training with Virion was supposed to begin, so Arthur said it would start first thing in the morning, but there was something heavy lingering in his expression. He thought back to what Virion told him during their earlier talk about how brutal the training would be. It wasn't just going to be difficult, it was going to be hell. If you had to describe it, it'd feel like being dumped into boiling tar. And Arthur would be going through that every single day, for years, with no family around to support him. That's why Virion needed to know if Arthur was truly prepared, and Arthur told him yes. Even now, Arthur feels eager to begin his training, despite knowing how grueling it will be, because his desire to grow stronger and shape the future he envisions gives him purpose. Tessia says she'll push herself too because she doesn't want to be left behind. But for now, she still wants to make the most of their day together, so she suggests they grab another bite to eat. A few years quietly passed, with Arthur and Tessia sharpening their abilities under Virion's watchful eye. During that time, their bond grew stronger, but thanks to Tessia's naturally fiery drive to compete, most of their training ended up feeling more like intense duels than simple practice. After pushing herself hard during today's session, Tessia is completely wiped out, so while she takes a break, Virion shifts his attention to giving Arthur a deeper explanation about magic. Once a person manages to stabilize their mana flow, they become capable of casting elemental spells, specifically water, fire, wind, or earth. That said, which elements someone can control often comes down to their race. Take elves, for example. They're naturally in tune with wind spells and have strong compatibility with water and earth. But on the flip side, fire spells are a weak point for most elves. Dwarves, on the other hand, thrive when it comes to fire and earth manipulation but tend to struggle with water and wind. Meanwhile, humans are the wild card, technically able to learn all four elements, though each person's affinity will vary based on their training and natural leanings. Tessia wakes up and raises her hand and asks why Arthur hasn't been working on his mana core if it's supposedly that crucial. Virion replies that Arthur's body can't handle it just yet because he's carrying a beast's will inside him, and although that grants serious power, it also messes with the bond between his body and mana core. That's what's been causing the tight pain in his chest, so he needs to reintegrate his core before he can start any proper mana training. Tessia teases him and says this technically means she's stronger than Arthur at the moment, and Arthur snaps back that of course she's stronger because she's using mana with every attack she throws. Among elves, being able to awaken mana before the age of 10 is considered a big deal, but Tessia managed to do it at 9, which is why she's been able to train beside Arthur for so long now. Anyway, since Arthur's physical training has come far enough, Virion tells him the next step is to awaken the beast will inside him. If it works, that pressure in his chest should vanish completely. Becoming a beast tamer is a major step, and Arthur thanks him before asking him to get started right away. Arthur sits down to begin the process while Tessia watches anxiously, unsure if this is really safe for him. Virion admits Arthur might feel a little discomfort, but insists it won't be anything extreme. However, the moment Virion begins the ritual to awaken the beast will, Arthur lets out a scream of agony. The energy blasting out of his body is so intense that it sends both Virion and Tessia flying backward. The awakening process technically worked, but the sheer strain it placed on Arthur's body caused him to black out instantly, leaving both Virion and Tessia anxious. They carried him back to the palace and laid him down so he could rest and recover. When Arthur finally opens his eyes, the first thing he sees is Virion sitting quietly beside the bed. Virion asks if he's feeling alright, and Arthur replies that he's doing okay. Virion then asks if there was anything unique about the beast will that might explain such a violent reaction, since what happened during the process was far from normal. Arthur originally planned to keep his encounter with Sylvia a secret, but at this point, hiding it wouldn't do any good, so he comes clean and tells Virion that the beast will was gifted to him by a dragon. Virion freezes, stunned by the answer, and though it sounds hard to believe, he can't ignore that the power radiating from Arthur's beast will feels exactly like dragon magic. He looks Arthur dead in the eye and warns him never to speak of this to anyone, because if news ever got out that he carried a dragon's will, it would draw all kinds of dangerous attention. With that warning out of the way, Virion informs Arthur that he's expected to return home in 4 months. This catches Arthur off guard, since he thought he still had another 2 years before the next Inter-Race Council meeting. But it turns out that a cultural exchange was arranged recently, and in 4 months, the portals to Esura City will open. Arthur immediately asks if Tessia is aware of this, because she'd be heartbroken if she found out last minute that he was leaving. Virion assures him that the king and queen are already speaking with her about it right now. Later that evening, Arthur is lying in bed, staring at the egg that Sylvia entrusted to him, trying to wrap his head around the fact that he'll have to say goodbye to Tessia in just a few months. Suddenly, he notices the egg starting to crack, and within seconds, a tiny dragon hatches and climbs out. Arthur panics for a second, but the baby dragon looks more adorable than dangerous, so he gently lifts it. Then out of nowhere, the little thing chomps down on his arm. Arthur flinches and drops it, wincing in pain, but when he glances at his arm, instead of bite marks, there's a glowing crest forming. That mark links Arthur to the newborn dragon, allowing him to sense its thoughts, even if he can't completely interpret them yet. Since he'll be the one raising it, he decides to give her the name Sylvie, in honor of her mother Sylvia. Arthur drifts off again, but a few hours later, Tessia quietly slips into his room. She wants to talk about his upcoming departure, but as she lifts the blanket to wake him, she spots Sylvie curled up next to him, and instantly forgets what she came in for. Arthur jolts awake, initially thinking something serious had happened, but the second he realizes Tessia is just gushing over Sylvie, he rolls back over and dozes off again. Later on, Arthur and Tessia make their way to the training grounds for another session with Virion, and Tessia is pulling every trick she can to win Sylvie over. But after squeezing her half to death earlier, Sylvie is keeping a healthy distance from Tessia. They eventually meet up with Virion, and the moment he catches sight of Sylvie perched on Arthur's head, he nearly loses it because he never thought he'd lay eyes on a real dragon in his lifetime. While Tessia keeps trying to cuddle the little dragon, Arthur tells Virion that Sylvie hatched shortly after the beast while awakening the day before. He wonders aloud if keeping her close could cause issues, since people might start asking questions if they figure out what she really is, but Virion tells him not to worry. Dragons are seen as fairy tales nowadays, so no one would ever assume his companion is actually one. All Arthur needs to do is claim Sylvie is some rare creature with dragon-like features. Putting that aside, it's time to begin the day's training. Virion turns to Arthur and explains that now that he has awakened his beast will, he'll have to start strengthening both his mana core and beast core together, and the most effective way to train both is through live combat. So without another word, Virion begins to shift form. Once he finishes transforming, he tells Arthur that the training starts now. Arthur gets ready for a hit, but Virion just takes a single step and disappears. Arthur raises his guard, but he has zero idea where the attack will come from, and he can feel Virion is still nearby, but tracking him is completely impossible. His movement is unreal, and while Arthur would love to admire it, he'd rather not get completely wrecked for the sake of a demo, so he quickly throws his hands up in surrender. The moment he does, Virion materializes behind him. Arthur turns around and complains that fighting him is completely unfair. Virion could have pulled off a full 40-hit combo right then, and Arthur still wouldn't have seen it coming because Virion's beast will is tied to the Shadow Panther, allowing him to manipulate wind with such surgical precision that he can mute every sound his body makes. Virion's transformation is seriously impressive, but it's far from flawless because it drains a massive amount of his mana. Not that he planned to fight Arthur using that form anyway. He really just wanted to flex a little, and now that he's finished showing how strong a beast will can be, he conjures up a sword for Arthur so they can get to the real training. A few days roll by, and Arthur has been crushing it with mastering his beast will. That annoying pain in his chest hasn't come back, and his body's been trained to the point where he can now keep up with Virion's shadow mode. But outside of training, Arthur spent most of his free time hanging out with Tessia like any normal kid. Later on, while Arthur and Tessia are out for another stroll, Arthur runs into Ferrith in the street. He doesn't recognize him at all, which ticks Ferrith off, and he demands a rematch. Obviously, that goes about how you'd expect, and a second later, Ferrith's on the ground while his buddies stand over him wondering how he got folded so fast. Arthur still doesn't remember who this guy is, so Tessia reminds him that Ferrith's the same brat who challenged him to a duel years ago. Arthur remembers that day being a blast, so he reaches out to help Ferrith up as a gesture of peace, and Ferrith accepts since he's over trying to fight Arthur now. Arthur asks Ferrith if he and his crew are going to be part of the upcoming cultural exchange, and Ferrith proudly confirms that he was selected thanks to his amazing skill. But the truth is, all the noble kids were automatically chosen to go. If that's the case, Arthur wonders if Tessia will be attending too, but apparently not. Ferrith says the royals don't want to risk their delicate little princess getting snatched again, which is fair, but Tessia is not having it. She clocks Ferrith in the face and accidentally launches him, knocking him out cold, The whole thing looks terrible, so Arthur quickly grabs her and bolts before a crowd forms. Once they're far enough away, Arthur scolds her because royalty can't just go around smacking civilians for no reason. Though let's be real, because he's not exactly one to talk about violence given the life he used to live. Tessia doesn't really get why he's so upset anyway, since she's pretty sure Ferrith is still breathing, but with Arthur yelling at her like her dad, she calls him an old geezer and storms off crying. That night, Tessia is still holed up in her room, wiping her tears. Wanting to cheer her up, Arthur quietly sneaks over to her window and asks if she wants to take a walk in the woods. Tessia agrees, and while they're strolling beneath the trees, she asks if this is really okay. Arthur reassures her that if they run into any troublemakers out here, they're more than strong enough to handle it or run. Besides, the view under the stars makes the risk worth it. Arthur glances at her and asks if she's starting to doze off, and while Tessia is barely holding it together, she insists she's totally awake. Arthur says she can knock out if she wants to, but she reminds him that this might be her last chance to hang out with him like this, so she's not going to waste it sleeping. Still, she's so tired she starts imagining creatures peeking from the trees, and Arthur can't help but tease her for still being scared of spooky stories at her age. Tessia claims she's not afraid of ghosts, she's just shivering from the cold, that's all, and she throws more logs into the fire to warm up. Then she asks Arthur to tell her more about the human kingdom to help keep her awake, but Arthur admits he doesn't really know much. He's never actually been there. Tessia tells him she wishes he'd just stay here forever, and Arthur says he'd love to, but if he did, he'd never get to see his family again. He wants to keep the conversation going, but by the time he looks over, Tessia is fast asleep, so he settles down too, letting the night wind down. The day of Arthur's departure finally arrives, but before he goes, Urian gives him a parting gift. It's a special compass, one that can always guide Arthur back to the Elf Kingdom if he ever decides to return. Arthur thanks him, but then notices something strange, that Tessia isn't there. He asks around, but no one's seen her. It turns out she couldn't bring herself to watch him leave. The portal is open now, and Arthur steps toward it. But before he can go through, he hears someone shouting his name, and it's Tessia. She's sprinting down the road, trying to reach him, but she trips halfway there. Arthur rushes over, kneels beside her, and holds out his hand. As she takes it, she starts talking a mile a minute, telling him he better not do anything reckless while he's away or she'll never forgive him. Arthur knows she's scared for him, so he pulls her into one last hug and quietly tells her he's really going to miss her. The following day, Arthur finally arrives in Cyrus City and is greeted with a heartfelt reunion, but what really catches him off guard is discovering that he now has a baby sister. Her name is Eleanor, and from what he hears, Alice and Ray have been filling her head with tales about him since she was little. So when they finally meet, she's practically bouncing with excitement to see the brother she's heard so much about. Then once they're all inside and settled, Alice wastes no time and looks at Arthur with concern and asks how he's really been because the last time they spoke, he mentioned being unwell, so now she just wants to know if he's truly recovered. Arthur assures her that he's fine now and there's nothing to stress about, but he knows they deserve answers, so he sits them down and tells them everything he's been through since the day they got separated. Of course, he leaves out the parts about meeting Sylvia and receiving her beast will. Instead, he focuses on how he met Tessia and the time he spent in the Elf Kingdom getting treatment for his condition. Alice still looks concerned and asks him again if he's really okay, because if his sickness ever comes back, there's no way they could help him in a place like this. Arthur tells her not to worry, it won't come back. But since he can't tell them the truth about the beast will, he makes something up, saying his illness was caused by awakening his mana core too early, which made it unstable. Lying to his parents isn't something Arthur feels good about, but until he's strong enough to handle whatever danger might come from the truth, it's safer this way. That's when Ray spots Sylvie and asks Arthur where he found her. So Arthur plays it cool and lies again by saying that he found Sylvie in a mana beast's cave and decided to take her in as his pet. Eleanor meanwhile instantly takes a liking to Sylvie, and the two seem to hit it off. But still Ray isn't done with his questions, so he stands up and asks Arthur what stage his mana core is at now. Alice quickly scolds him for trying to challenge Arthur when he's just come home from such a long trip. But Ray doesn't see the harm in sizing up how much his son has grown. Arthur doesn't mind the question, but before he answers, he wants to know how Ray can afford such a fancy place. Ray laughs and explains that he works his ass hard as a security instructor at the Helsty auction house, and that his mana core has reached the dark orange stage. Arthur's genuinely impressed because orange is a pretty high-level core, and the mana core rankings go from black all the way to white. with lighter colors signifying more powerful cores. Ray's always been a bit of an oddball when it comes to mentoring, so of course he spends a ton of time training his body. But who would have guessed he'd been leveling up his mana core too? He's clearly proud of himself, so he throws the question back at Arthur and asks what stage his mana core's at. Arthur tells him he's at the light red stage, and Ray immediately starts swearing when he realizes Arthur's just one breakthrough away from surpassing him. Unfortunately, he forgot Eleanor was in the room, and now she's running around dropping every swear word he just said like candy. Ray still can't wrap his head around the fact that Arthur's almost past him in strength, and there's no way he's letting that slide. He challenges Arthur to a sparring match in the garden right now. Arthur agrees without hesitation, but just before they can head out, the living room doors fly open and Vincent walks in, asking if Ray's kid is back yet. Ray introduces the man as Vincent Helsty, the guy who owns the auction house Ray works for, so yeah, basically Ray's boss. Vincent and his wife, Tabitha, are both excited to finally meet Arthur since they've heard a ton about him. Arthur greets them politely, and Vincent's already impressed, mostly because there's no way Arthur picked up those manners from Ray. Anyway, Vincent and Tabitha introduce their daughter Lilia, and at first, she's kind of quiet around Arthur. But the second she sees Sylvie on his shoulder, she completely melts. She asks Arthur if it's okay to pet Sylvie, and once he says yes, she immediately starts snuggling her like she's the cutest thing she's ever seen. While she's busy cuddling the baby dragon, Ray leans in and reminds Arthur that technically, Vincent owns the house, so they should probably ask before they end up wrecking anything. Vincent gets instantly nervous when Ray mentions wrecking, and his fears are confirmed the moment he finds out Ray and Arthur are planning to go head-to-head in the garden. Everyone moves outside to watch the match, but Vincent can't help asking if it's really okay for Arthur and Ray to fight. He's still struggling to believe that a kid Arthur's age has already reached the light red core stage. Alice, however, knows her son better than anyone and says that Arthur's always been a fast learner, and besides, it's not like he has any reason to lie. So Tabitha just tells Vincent to relax and enjoy the match. What no one knows, though, is that Arthur could have hit the orange stage years ago, but while he was training with his beast will, he wasn't allowed to touch his mana core at all. Still, he's more than ready to put on a show, because Arthur's got a few new tricks he's been dying to use. As soon as the match starts, Arthur and Ray go straight into trading blows, and Ray's immediately impressed by how much stronger Arthur has become, but he still has the upper hand when it comes to raw strength. After a few quick exchanges, distance opens up between them, and Ray grins as he says he's ready to crank things up. He covers his hand in flames and warns Arthur that he can still call it quits if he wants. In this world, every mage has an elemental type they're most compatible with, and for conjurers, manipulating that element is simple, but augmenters not so much. That is, unless they hit a high enough level, and once they do, they can identify their elemental affinity and use it to enhance their physical attacks. Ray's fire-imbued strikes make him a lot tougher to deal with, so Arthur decides it's time to stop holding back, so he starts channeling mana straight into his arms. When they clash again, they're much more evenly matched, but Arthur still gets launched back from Ray's sheer power. Even so, all the combat theory Arthur carried over from his past life made his training under Varian ridiculously effective. He ended up mastering fire magic early on, and once he did, Varian told him to push further to start aiming beyond standard elemental control. Arthur focuses his mana again, but this time, electricity starts sparking around his body, and he's generating lightning now. Ray is stunned because he can't believe Arthur's really using an advanced form of fire magic, but Arthur's not done yet. While channeling lightning, he also starts manipulating water from the nearby fountain, curving it behind Ray for a surprise attack. Ray manages to block it just in time, but now he's truly floored. Arthur's using both fire and water elements at once. He couldn't be prouder, so he grabs Arthur in a hug, asking him where he picked up those skills and whether he's hiding even more tricks up his sleeve. Arthur explains that he just started working on lightning magic recently, and while his control still needs work, he's making steady progress. That's when little Eleanor comes sprinting onto the field to check on both Arthur and Ray, and over at the sidelines, Vincent and Tabitha are still completely speechless. Because let's be honest, no normal kid should be able to pull off what Arthur just did. Later that night, everyone gathers around the table for dinner, and Vincent just won't stop going on about how amazing Arthur is, so Ray grins and says he knew Arthur was something else ever since he awakened his mana when he was just 3. Vincent nearly chokes on his drink because that's ridiculous. Even the most talented mages usually don't awaken their mana until they're about 8. Then again, most of them also don't blow up their house in the process. Ray bursts into laughter remembering that moment, though maybe he laughs a bit too hard because he ends up tipping over in his chair. Right after that, Vincent stands up and suggests Arthur should apply to Cyrus Academy. Ray had never really thought about that before after all. Cyrus is usually reserved for wealthy and well-connected mages, but Tabitha agrees with Vincent and says they'd even be willing to sponsor Arthur's tuition because someone with talent like his is bound to go far. Alice looks hesitant to accept though, because she knows they've already done so much for their family, and now they want to pay for Arthur's education too. Besides, Arthur's only 8, and the Cyrus Academy usually only accepts students starting at 10. But Vincent's already one step ahead. He mentions that he knows the Academy's director personally, thanks to his work, and if he speaks to her, he's sure he can get Arthur an exception. Before they can go any further, Arthur finally speaks up. He says it would have been nice if someone actually asked him how he felt before deciding something so major. He just got reunited with his family today, and he'd kind of like to enjoy that before anyone talks about shipping him off to school. Then he gets up from the table and starts walking through the hallways, though to be fair, he's still not familiar with the layout of this place. A moment later, Lilia calls out to him and warns that if he keeps walking that way, he'll end up lost in the basement. She tells him to follow her instead, and Arthur doesn't have anything else to do right now, so he goes along. She leads him to one of the break rooms where all the house staff usually hang out. Everyone there greets Lilia right away since she visits often, and even though Arthur only just arrived today, they already know who he is, mainly because he scorched the garden earlier during his spar with Ray. Arthur apologizes for the trouble, but no one seems too bothered about it. Then Lilia asks Maria if there's any duck left over, and there is, but Maria warns her to watch how much she eats, teasing that she's starting to put on weight lately. Then one of the maids lets Arthur know that Lilia tends to come down here when she's feeling overwhelmed. Her parents have been putting a lot of pressure on her to awaken as a mage, so they've been pushing her through non-stop lessons. Lilia does want to become a mage herself, but all that pressure eventually builds up, and sometimes she just needs a moment to breathe. That evening, Arthur is spending some quiet time with his parents, and they're still absolutely overjoyed to have their little boy back. He may look a lot different now compared to the last time they saw him, but deep down, he's still the same kid they raised. With Arthur's talent, it's pretty clear he's going to be an incredible mage someday, but even if he wasn't, they'd still love him just as much. They'd love to stay up and keep talking, but they're sure Arthur must be wiped out from everything, so they get up and tell him goodnight. But before they head out though, Ray stops and brings up what Vincent mentioned earlier. He knows it might have come off as a little pushy, but everything Vincent said was out of genuine concern for Arthur's future. And just to be clear, no one is going to force Arthur to go to the academy if it's not something he wants. The next day, Arthur wakes up and hurries downstairs because some familiar faces have shown up to visit. The Twin Horns crew found out Arthur was back, so they stopped by to see how he was doing. Arthur's happy to reunite with them, but Angela is even more pumped because she immediately pulls Arthur into a giant, nice hug. And after Angela finally lets go, Arthur turns to greet the rest of the group. But then Jasmine walks up and starts running her hands over Arthur's body. Yeah, it might look weird to anyone watching, but she's just making sure there aren't any lasting injuries. Once she confirms he's fine, she pulls him into a small, nice hug and says sorry for everything that happened. She's still upset that she couldn't protect him the day he got separated from the group, so seeing him alive and well is a massive relief. Not long after, everyone settles in and starts catching up. Arthur's surprised to hear that the Twin Horns spent some time out in the city of Etiston. They landed a pretty solid contract out there, but had to come back to the capital for another job. Listening to their stories makes Arthur realize just how little he knows about the kingdom of Sapin, let alone the rest of Decathlon. Becoming an adventurer sounds like an exciting way to see the world, but that also means leaving his family behind again, and he's not so sure he's willing to do that again. Some days slip by, and we find Arthur alone in his room, deep in training as he works to gain control over his beast will. During one intense session, he stumbles onto something unreal, a strange ability that lets him freeze time itself, but the catch is that it only lasts for a few seconds, and every time he taps into it, it drains him completely. Exhausted and frustrated, he starts wondering if pushing his body this far for a power he barely understands is even worth it. But then it hits him that he's not doing this for glory or pride, he's doing it to protect the people who matter most. And that thought alone is enough to push him forward, and he throws himself right back into training. Though before anything else, he notices Sylvie smells absolutely awful, so he grabs her and heads to the bath. She's not a fan of getting washed, but Arthur's not about to let her stink up this beautiful place. Speaking of the mansion, with how massive and high-end the Helsty estate is, Arthur figures their auction house must be raking it in. Still, he doesn't know much about how they operate. After he finally finishes giving Sylvie a good scrub, he's drying her off on his bed when his family walks in and reminds him that he could use a wash too. While he never really cared about his looks during his time in the Elf Kingdom, that changes real quick when his mom drags him off to her favorite salon. The hairdresser swears he'll make him look amazing, and honestly, he doesn't look much different afterward, just a bit of a trim, but everyone insists he looks way cooler now. Arthur's kind of puzzled why they're suddenly so invested in his looks, but then Tabitha explains she's planning to show him their auction house. Since it's such a high-profile place where even royals drop by, they couldn't have him walking in with a hairstyle that screams Jungle Boy. Since they're already in Cyrus City, she offers to show him around town, and Eleanor chimes in saying she wants to go too so she can spend more time with her big brother. Lilia feels a little left out because before Arthur came back, Eleanor used to hang out with her all the time. Still, she wants to be around Arthur too, so she doesn't make a big deal out of it. They all end up spending the day together, laughing and playing a game of ring toss near a statue. But out of nowhere, a bunch of guys suddenly toss a ring at his head and walk away like nothing happened. Arthur's left staring, completely thrown off, so he asks Lilia what that was about since those guys seemed way too cocky. She tells him they're students from Cyrus Academy, and thanks to their uniforms, people around here treat them like they're nobility. Arthur's honestly disappointed because he thought he'd be able to avoid that kind of arrogance in town, but for now, he decides to just let it slide. Not long after, Arthur senses a strange energy coming from a nearby shop, so he heads over to check it out. His parents explain that it's a beast core store. Arthur is caught completely off guard because he didn't even know you could buy or sell beast cores. Back in the Elf Kingdom, that kind of thing just wasn't a thing, but apparently here in the human world, it's super normal. Tabitha goes on to explain that beast cores help boost a mage's power, and if one has a beast's will inside, it could sell for up to 100 gold coins. Just to give an idea, that kind of money could keep Arthur's whole family living comfortably for over 2 centuries. She tells him their auction house will be offering some beast cores soon and says she could let him hold one if he's curious. Arthur thanks her, but he's not that interested because he's totally fine with the one he got from Sylvia. That's when Lilia suddenly pipes up and asks her mom if she can have one too, but Tabitha shuts it down instantly, because getting a beast core isn't some magic trick to make her awaken overnight, and besides, she says they're way too pricey for a kid like Lilia. Lilia keeps pushing, but Tabitha stands her ground and says that's the end of the conversation. Later, they stop by a small cafe for lunch, but Arthur can tell Lilia is still upset. From what was said earlier, it's clear Tabitha wants Lilia to take her time with awakening, but something's bugging Lilia because she seems like she's in a hurry for a reason. Arthur's about to ask what's going on, but then he looks around and realizes Lilia's not even there anymore. And even though she was sitting right next to her mom, Tabitha doesn't seem the least bit concerned when her daughter just wandered off down a shady alleyway. Arthur gets up and follows her trail, eventually finding her inside a magic shop. She's staring at one of the cheaper beast cores on display. With her own pocket money, she could probably afford that one, but Arthur steps in and asks if she's really sure about this, because just getting a beast core doesn't mean she'll suddenly be able to cast magic. Lilia brushes him off, saying she won't know unless she tries, so she reaches for the core, but Arthur gently grabs her hand and tells her to wait because he doesn't think this is the right move. But Lilia doesn't want to hear it from him, because as far as she's concerned, he'll never get what she's going through, not when he's always been gifted. Lilia quickly pulls away from Arthur, but in doing so, she accidentally bumps into someone behind her, and it just so happens to be one of the Axiris punks from before. She immediately apologizes, saying it was an accident, but the guys got way too much pride to let that slide. The group of them start gearing up to pick a fight. The shop owner hears the noise and comes out to check what's going on, but the second he sees those Axiris uniforms, he nopes out and heads right back into his office, clearly wanting nothing to do with those troublemakers. Now the Academy boys figure they've got a free pass to do whatever they want, and first on their list is burning Arthur and Lilia. Lilia immediately hides behind Arthur, and while Arthur would have liked to settle this without a scene, these guys clearly aren't the talk-it-out type. He gets ready to knock them down a peg, but right before anything can happen, Tabitha and Alice arrive and order everyone to drop their magic right now. The boys try to brush her off at first, asking who the hell she thinks she is. Even the shopkeeper runs out and begs Tabitha not to tick them off, saying they could level the store if they wanted. But Tabitha doesn't back down and makes it clear, if any one of them so much as lays a hand on the Halstead family's daughter, they're done. The moment they realize who Lilia is, they all start freaking out. The Helsti family is one of the Academy's biggest donors, so if the director hears about this, they're out for good. They scramble to leave, not daring to cause more problems, but one of them still manages to throw a final insult, calling Lilia a worthless spoiled brat before storming off. Everyone heads back home, and when they get there, they explain everything to Vincent. He's stunned to hear that Arthur and Lilia almost ended up in a full-on fight with Academy students, but he's relieved Tabitha stepped in, because knowing Arthur, there's a good chance he would have gone too far and seriously hurt them. Lilia quietly apologizes for the mess, but Vincent tells her it's okay. She didn't do anything wrong, and with how much he's donated to the Academy, this won't hurt her chances of getting in. He even adds that Arthur doesn't have to worry either, but Lilia immediately takes it the wrong way, thinking that her dad wants Arthur to take her place instead. Her parents try to explain that's not what they meant, but she's so overwhelmed by her own doubts that she believes they see her as a disappointment. She yells that she hates both of them and takes off, leaving everyone completely stunned. After a few hours, when it's time for dinner, Arthur heads up to get Lilia, but her room's empty. When she was little, Vincent would always share stories about the Academy, so Lilia had been looking forward to it for as long as she could remember. That excitement eventually turned into impatience, but she couldn't apply until her mana awakened, and it's been taking longer than anyone expected. Her parents kept telling her not to stress over it, but once she saw Arthur mastering magic at such a young age, she couldn't help but feel like she was falling behind. Arthur finally tracks her down in the staff break room, sitting quietly. He wants to say something that'll lift her up, but the last thing he wants is to sound condescending, so for a second, he hesitates. But before he even says a word, Lilia beats him to it and apologizes for being jealous. After he showed off his power, her dad started giving him all this attention, and even though she doesn't blame him, it still hurts, because she feels like she's the problem, like she's the one who fell short. Arthur gets it because he knows exactly what it's like to wrestle with that kind of doubt, so he grabs her cheeks and tells her straight up that she's not a disappointment. He's seen how hard she's been working, and he knows her parents see it too. They're proud of her, and some overpowered freak like him isn't going to change that. Lilia lets out a laugh, realizing how ridiculous she's been acting. Her dad just wants her to become a mage so she can be happy. That's why he's been pouring money into making sure she gets into the Academy. She gets that her parents don't want her to burn herself out, but the more Vincent does for her behind the scenes, the more it makes her look like some pampered rich kid in everyone else's eyes. Arthur gets where she's coming from, so he offers to help. He asks her if she really wants to use magic, because if she does, he knows a way to speed things up. Later that evening, Arthur tells Lilia's parents that she's left the house, and they're caught off guard. They immediately ask what happened, so Arthur explains that he sent her off to train to help her awaken her magic. And just in case they're worried, he assures them that the people she's with are trustworthy and kind. Still, Vincent and Tabitha demand to know why he'd do something like that without talking to them first. Arthur says it wasn't his decision alone. Lilia wanted it that way. If she had to say goodbye face to face, her nerves might have gotten the better of her. But she didn't leave without a word. She wrote them a letter, and Arthur hands it over to worried Dad. The letter says Lilia always felt like a failure for not being able to use magic, but no matter how long it takes, she's going to keep training until she becomes an incredible mage. Until that day comes, she won't come home, so she asks her parents to stay safe while she's gone. Hearing that, Vincent drops to his knees, crushed because deep down, he knows this is his fault. He's the one who drilled it into her that becoming a mage was the only way to be happy. But the truth is, magic or not, she's his daughter, and he could never see her as worthless. Right after he says that out loud, Arthur turns and calls Lilia to come out, and to Vincent's complete shock, she walks in from behind the door. She'd been there the whole time. Confused, Vincent asks what's going on, and Arthur steps in to explain. He starts by saying sorry for tricking them, and he knows how terrifying it must have felt to think Lilia ran away, and he truly regrets scaring them like that. But he did it to help Lilia see something, that her parents would love her no matter what, even if she never learns to use magic. Vincent hears him out, and instead of getting mad, he realizes how blind he's been all this time. So he walks over to Ray and Alice and apologizes for trying to push Arthur straight into the academy the moment he came back. Then he turns to Lilia and tells her he's sorry for making her feel like she had to be a mage. He says she doesn't need to go to the academy. She doesn't need to become anything she doesn't want to be. She just needs to be happy. And that's all that matters. Lilia is grateful, but she explains that she still wants to enroll. Even if it takes a couple more years for her mana to awaken, she wants to get there on her own terms. She wants to become a mage, not just for herself, but to use her powers to help others feel joy. Arthur hears that, and if that's what she really wants, he promises to help her awaken her mana. Since he's doing it for Lilia, Arthur figures he might as well help Eleanor too. So the two of them sit in the middle of the room, ready to start. He tells them to take a few deep breaths, hold, and slowly breathe out with their eyes closed, just to try and feel the mana inside them. Eleanor locks onto hers almost instantly, but Lilia is struggling to find hers. She starts doubting herself, wondering if maybe she just doesn't have what it takes, but Arthur tells her to keep going. He then places a hand on each of their backs and warns them that he's about to trigger their mana, and they might feel a little warmth. Once the process kicks in, glowing lights start to appear in Lilia's vision, and just like that, her mana awakens at last, and her face lights up with pure happiness. Afterward at night, Alice and her family arrive at the prestigious Hulstey auction house after receiving an invitation, and they're all taken aback by how lavish and refined the place is. The sheer elegance of the venue leaves Alice feeling a little uneasy, unsure if she really belongs somewhere so upscale. But Tabitha gently comforts her, telling her there's no need to worry and to simply chill and enjoy the auction. Tonight's auction is something adventurers and nobles alike have eagerly awaited, as it's a rare opportunity to acquire exclusive items that Vincent personally collected. Among the impressive items available are magical beast cores and precious foreign statues, so security at the event is incredibly strict, and Ray, of course, is overseeing the entire guard force. Once the auction kicks off, Vincent walks confidently onto the stage and announces the presence of special guests tonight. The esteemed royal family of the Kingdom of Sapin, King Blaine Glader, Queen Priscilla, and their kids, Prince Curtis and Princess Kathleen. Cheers erupt from the crowd at the royal family's introduction, leading Arthur to conclude they must indeed be great rulers if the people adore them this much. With royalty in attendance, Ray and the security team are especially vigilant, determined to ensure nothing disrupts the proceedings. At the same time inside the hall, Vincent opens the bidding with the very first item, a blade meticulously crafted by a renowned artisan, enchanted to channel mana and produce electricity at its tip. The bidding for the sword starts at 50 gold coins, but immediately an eager participant increases the bid to 51 gold coins. As bidders compete fiercely, Arthur quietly considers if he might also infuse an elemental power into a weapon suited for it. That's when he spots Vincent introducing a pair of mysterious masks that catch his attention, but just as he focuses on them, he realizes Sylvie is nowhere to be found. Initially assuming she might be playing with Lilia or Eleanor, he spots the two girls sleeping nearby and becomes concerned, getting up quickly to search for Sylvie. At the same time, Sylvie wanders leisurely through the auction house corridors like she owns the place, until suddenly she's intercepted by the mage accompanying the royal family. Meanwhile on the stage, Vincent introduces the next coveted auction item, announcing it as an A-rank lion cub. Immediately upon seeing it, Prince Curtis turns excitedly to his father, declaring he wants it. As soon as bidding commences, the king decisively offers 1,000 gold coins right away, and naturally, no one dares to outbid the king, and the lion cub swiftly goes to him without any resistance. The king then walks up onto the stage to claim the cub, prompting Vincent to ask him what he intends to do with such a rare beast. The king explains he might tame the lion himself, but since Curtis expressed a desire to become a beast tamer, he'll give it to his son instead. At that very moment, Arthur is still busy tracking down Sylvie when he suddenly hears her let out a loud scream from down the corridor. He bolts toward the sound and finds her being stared at by the mage from the royal entourage. Recognizing the guy instantly, Arthur knows better than to cause a scene in a place like this. He calmly asks the mage to let Sylvie go, explaining that she's his mana beast. The mage sighs in disappointment, having assumed Sylvie was one of the auction creatures. Sylvie then rushes over to Arthur, and as he starts to walk away, the mage calls out that he's still interested in her. He says he's been wanting to get his hands on a mana beast for some time now and demands that Arthur give Sylvie to him. Arthur gives him a look like he's lost his damn mind and asks what makes him think that would ever happen. But instead of dropping it, the mage throws a fire spell right at Arthur, clearly trying to intimidate him, and announces that it's a direct order from a royal court mage. But Arthur doesn't flinch, simply turning to walk away. That only pisses the mage off more, so he threatens Arthur's parents next. And while Arthur can put up with threats directed at himself, bringing his family into it is something he won't tolerate, so he turns back slowly and dares him to repeat it. But in that moment, as Arthur releases an overwhelming surge of killing intent, he forgets one crucial thing. They're still inside Vincent's auction house. The sheer pressure of his aura explodes outward, and every window in the building shatters on the spot. Those with mana like the king manage to endure it, but anyone without, including Vincent, collapses from the pressure. The king rushes to check on Vincent while the royal guards quickly form a protective circle around him, believing an assassin must be nearby. The king tells them to focus on crowd safety and finding whoever's responsible. Arthur finally realizes the magnitude of what he just did. While he may have succeeded in scaring the royal mage half to death, he's now stirred up a massive storm. He suppresses his aura, but the chaos has already begun. No one knows what's really happening, so Ray gives the order to clear out the entire venue until the situation is under control. Following the evacuation, the king calls for a private meeting with Ray. He wants to confront him about his failure to capture the one behind the outburst. Ray bows his head and offers a sincere apology, but the king, with a stone face, tells him there must still be consequences. Ray is prepared to accept whatever sentence the king decides, but before King Blaine can say anything, the royal mage interrupts and suggests the king go easy on Ray since no lives were lost. Of course, he doesn't say this out of kindness, because he follows it up by pointing out how impressive Arthur's mana beast looks. That's when the king introduces the guy as Sebastian, a mage tasked with protecting the royal family. Apparently, Sebastian has saved the king's life more times than anyone can count, so he holds the guy in high regard. Now that Sebastian has expressed interest in Arthur's beast, the king turns to Ray and asks if he'd consider handing Sylvie over as a gesture of thanks for Sebastian's leniency. Arthur is about to object, but Alice quickly stops him because interrupting a royal is no small offense. Ray then replies respectfully, saying he can't comply with the king's request because Arthur bonded with Sylvie on his own, so that bond isn't his to sever. So the king directs the same request to Arthur himself, asking whether he'd be willing to part with Sylvie and give her to Sebastian. Arthur gives a firm but polite no, because nothing in the world could replace Sylvie. Trying a different approach, the king then offers to trade the world lion cub he just bought at the auction. He argues that although Sylvie is clearly rare, a lion of that caliber should be worth even more. But Arthur refuses again, stating that Sylvie isn't something he'd ever trade, sell, or give away, no matter what was offered. Now the king's tone begins to shift, his patience wearing thin. He reminds Arthur that he's already asked him twice, and a monarch shouldn't have to repeat a request more than once. For the third and final time, the king insists that Arthur surrender his mana beast, but at this point, Arthur has had enough of this shit, so he stands up and calmly asks the king if he would be willing to sell his own children. The room goes silent. The king is so stunned he's completely speechless, and Arthur presses further. He points out that he's declined the request 3 times, and yet the king refuses to acknowledge that some bonds are beyond price, so he wants to know how the king would react if someone tried to buy one of his kids. The royal guards don't take kindly to the remark and rush in to subdue Arthur for his insolence. But Arthur takes both of them out with a single punch each effortlessly. Sebastian watches the scene unfold and calls the knights pathetic, disgusted that they failed to handle one boy. Still determined to get Sylvie, he casts a deadly fire spell with the intent of killing Arthur on the spot. But Arthur activates his static world technique, and in an instant time grinds to a halt for everyone besides Sebastian. Sebastian looks around in shock, trying to figure out why everyone suddenly froze, but Arthur calmly explains that nobody can hear a thing he's saying right now. Then Arthur begins slowly walking toward him. Sebastian tries to warn him off, claiming Arthur doesn't stand a chance against a royal mage, but Arthur answers that by snapping Sebastian's leg without a word. Sebastian cries out for help, but Arthur tells him nobody's coming, so he'd better listen carefully while he still has working ears. Arthur leans in and warns him to stay in his lane and think twice before threatening the wrong person, because next time, it won't end with just a broken leg. A few seconds later, the static world effect wears off, time resumes like nothing happened, and Arthur immediately blacks out from the strain. Sometime later, Arthur wakes up in his bed, his head pounding like hell, but at least he's not chained up in a cell. He realizes that using static world might have been a little too much. He really did manage to freeze time briefly, but the backlash hit his body like a truck. Just then, Alice enters the room to check on him, and she's visibly relieved to see him conscious again. Arthur asks her what happened after he passed out, and Alice tells him that the moment he collapsed, everyone panicked. She rushed to help and started treating him right away, but even then, it took a while before he finally stabilized. Now that he's up and talking again, Alice asks if he wants to tag along with her for a shopping trip. Arthur figures a little walk might do him good, so he agrees. While they're out, Arthur notices a hairpin that would suit Eleanor perfectly, but he still doesn't have any money on him. Alice sees this and buys it for him, telling Arthur he can give it to Eleanor as a gift when the time's right. She even offers to buy him something too, but Arthur hesitates and asks if it's really okay to be spending so much, especially if Ray might have lost his position after the auction house incident. But Alice reassures him that there's no need to stress over that because she has a job too. Arthur's surprised because he had no clue she worked, but apparently, Alice creates luxury goods, and they're a hit among nobles. She earns enough to keep them comfortable, so spending a little extra now and then isn't a problem at all. And by the end of their shopping spree, both of them are loaded down with bags. When they get back home, they overhear Ray talking to someone in the living room. He's saying that no amount of money can buy his silence when his own son was nearly killed. Arthur walks in and asks what's going on, and Ray's face immediately softens with relief at seeing Arthur up and moving. Arthur tries to downplay it, saying there's no need to fuss and he's fine. The man Ray was speaking to turns, and after taking a good look at Arthur, realizes he must be the boy from the incident, so he invites Arthur to join their conversation. The royal envoy then hands over a pouch of gold to Ray and Arthur, explaining that it's a small gesture of apology from the king for the minor incident yesterday. Arthur isn't exactly sure how getting attacked by 2 knights and a royal mage counts as minor, but he chooses to be civil and thanks the messenger for making the trip out to deliver it personally. The envoy is glad to see Arthur handling things so maturely, and he reassures him that the 2 guards who attacked him have already been dismissed. After all, the king would never condone harming a child over something as small as declining a request. Ray, on the other hand, doesn't think getting fired is anywhere close to a fitting punishment for the knights who tried to massacre his son. But the envoy quickly reminds him that Arthur did speak out of turn to the king, and decides the king had the grace to overlook Ray's failure to protect the auction house, so Ray shouldn't be too bitter about a little mercy shown to the guards. Ray's about to argue again, but Arthur jumps in before he can and says there's no point getting worked up. He admits he was the one who mouthed off to royalty, and in the end, he walked away without any serious injuries, so it's not a big deal to him. Still, on the topic of injuries, Arthur brings up Sebastian and asks how he's doing after that broken leg. The envoy says Sebastian was also stripped of his position for lashing out at Arthur and is currently undergoing treatment in a hospital. He keeps claiming Arthur was the one who broke his leg, but that sounds ridiculous, considering no one actually saw Arthur lay a finger on him, and the entire room had eyes on him the whole time. So the king believes it must have been a magical backlash from Sebastian's own spell that caused the injury. The king is deeply regretful that things escalated this far, which is why he took the initiative to issue a formal apology. The envoy acknowledges that Arthur's clearly a talented and respectful young man, but he also gives him a warning: be mindful when speaking to those in power, because not everyone will be as lenient as the king. Arthur and Ray accept the apology, and once the envoy is gone, Ray hands the whole bag of gold over to Arthur. Arthur is surprised and asks if Ray's sure about this, but Ray says it's only fair. Arthur's the one who put himself on the line, so he deserves the reward. Plus, he figures Arthur's going to need some cash if he's planning to make any serious moves later on. Today turned out to be a harsh wake-up call for Arthur. In his previous life, he was a king, but in this one, he's still just a kid. If he wants to stand toe-to-toe with real power, he'll need some political influence of his own. Which is why, the very next morning, he sets off to the Magic Academy, where he meets with Cynthia Goodsky, the director of the Magic Academy. And holding the title of director at Osiris Academy gives her immense authority, and getting a face-to-face meeting with her is no easy feat for the average person. Although Goodsky had heard glowing reports about Arthur from Vincent, she's not the type to take praise at face value. Instead, she's determined to judge Arthur for herself and find out whether he truly lives up to the hype. Initially, she attempts to overwhelm Arthur with her incredible magical presence, but he remains calm under pressure. Still, while he's able to endure it, he admits privately that Goodsky's aura is genuinely terrifying. Yet that makes sense considering she's the strongest mage currently living in this nation. Arthur decides to demonstrate his true strength clearly enough to convince her that Vincent wasn't simply exaggerating his skills. First, he creates a swirling barrier of wind around himself, and while maintaining that, he simultaneously lifts several stones with earth magic. He then propels these stones forward using wind magic, firing them straight at Goodsky, but she casually deflects the assault with one simple gesture. Next, Arthur conjures several fiery throwing knives behind Goodsky. But before any of them can reach her, she counters effortlessly by dispersing them with a gust of wind. Arthur can barely believe she's handling everything he's thrown her way without breaking a sweat, so frustration gets the best of him, and he rushes forward ready to punch. But before he even reaches striking distance, Goodsky repels him instantly with a gust barrier. Arthur goes sprawling onto the floor, and it quickly becomes obvious that, as things stand, he isn't nearly strong enough to defeat Goodski. Yet losing this fight doesn't mean Goodski is disappointed with how he performed. She praises his incredible potential, but points out he has a habit of being overconfident in his skills, leading him to assume he could overwhelm her easily. And now, as one final demonstration of her true strength, Goodski says Arthur's last challenge is to see whether he can remain awake after taking her next spell. Raising her hands above her head, she releases a powerful blast of sound magic aimed directly at Arthur. This sonic attack is intense enough to shatter nearby boulders, and it nearly destroys Arthur's hearing as well, but he manages to withstand it and stays upright until Goodski finishes. She finds herself thoroughly impressed by Arthur's determination, which makes her all the more eager to accept him as her apprentice. But Arthur mentions a few requirements he once clearly understood first. His entire reason for meeting Goodski is because she holds power and resources he requires, and everything he's doing is solely to ensure the safety of his friends and family. He makes it clear that if Goodski guarantees to help protect his loved ones, he'll gladly join the academy and officially study under her guidance. Goodski is honestly stunned by how bold Arthur is, since the whole arrangement seems totally one-sided in his favor, but Arthur figures he's worth the trade. And really, Goodski can't say he's wrong because students like him don't show up often. She's just about to accept his conditions when Arthur tosses in one more. He lets her know he's only enrolling once he hits the minimum age, since he wants to study alongside people his own age. Goodski questions that, pointing out he'd be pushing his enrollment back by a full 3 years. But Arthur insists that it's his life, and he wants to make the most of it. His plan is to travel the continent and live as an adventurer first. It's clear to Goodski that Arthur has already made up his mind, so arguing isn't going to change anything. She asks if he's even mentioned this plan to his family yet, and he admits he still needs to talk to them. So Goodski tells him that if he can get his parents to agree, then she'll approve all his conditions. But the moment Arthur returns home and shares his plan to become an adventurer, Alice shuts it down immediately and says no without a second thought. Ray tries to reason with her and at least hear Arthur out, but Alice isn't having it. Arthur just got back after being gone for years, and she has no intention of letting him leave again. Trying to find middle ground, Ray asks if she'd feel better about it if Arthur had a guardian tagging along during his travels, but Alice still won't budge. That's when Arthur finally steps forward and promises Alice that it won't be like last time. He says this isn't some long-term goodbye. He's only going on trips where he'll be able to return home every few months. That eases Alice's anxiety a bit, and besides, Arthur isn't leaving immediately either. He wants to stay home for another month or two first to relax and spend more time with them. Still, he needs to explore more of the Cathan, because there's so much out there he hasn't figured out yet, and training non-stop by himself would just get stale, so he wants real battles to put his skills to the test. Alice isn't totally against the idea of Arthur going off to be an adventurer anymore, but she's still nervous, so she asks him to promise that he won't hide anything from her. Arthur agrees to be upfront with her, but deep down, he knows there are plenty of secrets he'll have to keep from his family. On another note, Ray still thinks it'd be smart for Arthur to have someone watching his back, since adventuring is no joke, so he goes to reach out to his old friends to see if anyone can step in. He doesn't really have much money to offer, but he promises to pay them back however he can. Even so, the twin horns don't care about that. They say he doesn't need to worry about paying them because they're friends, and they're happy to help Arthur however they can. But even with all that, Adam immediately says he's out because babysitting isn't his thing, and he's worried that if they end up clashing, Arthur might get annoyed enough to kill him in his sleep. The others kinda laugh, but they agree that with how irritating Adam can be, that's not exactly far-fetched. Right then, Jasmine speaks up and volunteers. Everyone's caught off guard since they all know she hates bodyguard gigs even more than Adam does. But Jasmine says that it's for Arthur, she's okay with it, and Ray really appreciates her stepping up, so the job's officially hers. She's an augmenter like Arthur, recently hit the light orange rank, and she already gets along with him, so she's probably the best choice for something like this. Now that the guardian situation's taken care of, Arthur asks Ray if he can stop by the auction house since he still needs a sword for the adventurer exam. Ray doesn't mind and sends a request over to Vincent to set things up. The following day, Arthur meets up with Vincent and explains that he needs a weapon for the admissions trial. Vincent tells him to take his time and look through whatever he wants. There's a massive variety in stock, so going through all the swords is going to take a while. By the time dinner rolls around, Arthur still hasn't come back. Alice is starting to get anxious and thinks about going to look for him, but Ray tells her that picking the right sword takes time, so it's better to just wait and let Arthur handle it. At the same time, Arthur is still stuck, overwhelmed by all the choices in front of him. He's gone through hundreds of swords already, and not a single one has caught his eye. Since most fighters around here are augmenters, the collection is stacked with bulky two-handers or oversized one-handed swords. But with Arthur's smaller frame, none of those are even practical. He even gives other types of weapons a shot, but nothing seems to click. That's when Sylvie tugs at him, pointing his attention toward a random stick lying on the ground. Arthur doesn't understand what's so special about it, but he humors her and picks it up, only to notice right away that it's way heavier than it looks. The balance feels completely off too, like it's hiding a blade inside. Curious, Arthur gives the handle a tug, and after channeling a little mana into it, glowing runes flash in his vision. Suddenly, the sword unsheathes. He's never seen anything quite like this before, so he gives it a few test swings. It's too heavy for him to swing comfortably, but even so, the blade's quality is insane, and he slices clean through a barrel like it's nothing. While he's still messing around with it, the sword gives him a little shock, and he drops it by accident. But when he picks it back up, something's different. The balance is perfect now, and its shape feels like it was custom-made for him. Arthur's a bit thrown by how the weapon just adjusted to him like that. Back when he was King Gray, he handled countless legendary swords, but none that ever adapted to him so precisely. He tries another swing, this time at a second barrel, and it shatters in one clean strike. Just then, Vincent, Ray, and Jameson show up since Arthur's been gone way too long and dinner's getting cold. They ask if he's finally picked a sword, but Arthur isn't ready to show this one off because he's worried Vincent might realize how rare it is and try to take it back. So instead, he snatches some random blade off the rack and says he'll go with this one. Ray gives it a try, and while he can tell it's totally average, if Arthur's fine with it, then Vincent says it's his to keep. Right then, Vincent spots the stick strapped to Arthur's side and asks him about it, but Arthur brushes it off with a casual excuse, claiming it's just some random stick he found lying around and thought he used for light practice, since it's of course not a sword. Vincent doesn't even recall ever owning something like that, so he turns to Jameson and tells him to check the warehouse inventory and see where it came from. Jameson replies that some old guy once chucked it at him while muttering something weird about how nobody was worthy of using it. From the outside, it just looked like a reinforced staff, and even after consulting several experts, they all agreed it was nothing more than a plain stick. Still, Jameson thought it looked pretty cool and decided to stash it away. Arthur then politely asks if he can keep it, and since Vincent has no use for it anyway, he lets Arthur take it without a fuss. In the weeks that follow, Arthur enjoys spending time with his loved ones while getting ready for his journey. Before long, his 9th birthday rolls around. A big celebration is thrown in his honor, and later everyone gathers to give him their gifts. The first present he opens is from Alice, a glove enchanted with healing properties using embedded gems, so he can patch himself up if he ever gets injured. Vincent goes next, handing over a matching pair of rings and telling Arthur they're for his mom's peace of mind, as the gem on her ring will light up if Arthur is ever in serious danger, allowing them to send help right away. The last one comes from Adam. It's a voice scroll that can transmit messages, so Arthur can use it to send updates, and Alice will be able to respond. Arthur thanks everyone for the thoughtful gifts, and since he's officially setting off tomorrow, he tells them how much he appreciates all they've done for him. Alice then begs him to take care while he's out there, and she couldn't care less if he gets famous or rich because what matters is that he comes back safe. That evening, Arthur finishes packing his gear, and even though it hurts to leave his family again, he knows this is something he has to do to grow. So if he wants to protect the people he loves, he has to get stronger, and that means stepping out into the world and gaining real experience. Once he's all set, he heads downstairs where everyone is waiting to say goodbye. Ray reminds him not to get cocky just because he's strong, but he also tells him that while he's out there chasing his goals, they'll be cheering him on back home. First, Jasmine kicks things off by bringing Arthur to the Adventurers Guild to get him officially registered, and he arrives there wearing a cool mask, not just for the dramatic, mysterious flair, but also to keep his identity hidden because the last thing he wants is the royal family sniffing around and getting involved in his affairs. The receptionist then brings them straight to the office of Guild Master Caspian, who greets Jasmine with a big smile since she's not just some random A rank, she's got weight in this place. When Caspian finds out she wants Arthur to take the rank assessment, he says most people have to go through a few extra tests before that. Then he leans in close to Jasmine and whispers that since she's from a noble family, and he's on good terms with her dad, he'll bend the rules and let her partner skip straight to the exam. Caspian turns to Arthur next and tells him he doesn't have to use his real name when registering at the guild. He asks what name he should use, and Arthur decides to go with Note as his alias. The moment Arthur shakes his hand, he immediately picks up on how strong Caspian actually is, way stronger than he looks, especially for someone with that soft appearance. After that, Caspian walks them to the battle arena, which also doubles as the test site. Inside, a young magician is already mid-test, and she ends up getting a C rank. She clearly has good firepower, but her defense is lacking. Jasmine comments that the girl probably has strong potential anyway, since pulling off a C rank at her age isn't exactly easy. Then the next guy steps up, but he doesn't even have to spar. He just walks up and gets handed a B rank on the spot, and the whole crowd's left speechless. Arthur glances at Jasmine and asks what just happened, but even she has no clue. After that, some arrogant kid named Lucas steps up, demanding that the examiner skip his match and just hand over the A rank already. The examiner tells him he's not exactly wrong, his mana core's already at light orange stage, and he's only 11. That stuns everyone, but Arthur gets a better look and realizes Lucas is actually an elf. Once the test starts, Lucas summons a fire beast and sends it straight at the examiner, who quickly locks it inside a rock pyramid. Lucas jumps right on top of it and slams his staff down, triggering a big spell that sends fireballs raining over the whole arena before the fight's even fully underway. But then things go sideways, the giant fireball floating overhead loses control and looks like it's about to blow everything up. The examiner immediately jumps in, stirs up a thick dust cloud, and manages to protect Lucas while snuffing out the runaway spell in one smooth move. As the smoke clears out, the examiner tells Lucas he did pretty well, but the kid's still running high on adrenaline and suddenly lashes a fireball out at her without warning. Luckily, Arthur steps in and blocks the hit by chucking his sword across the field, and that sends Lucas into a tantrum. He yells that the match should be redone because someone interfered, but the referee shuts that down fast and says it was already finished. The main examiner then tells Lucas that while his power and potential are impressive, he's got no sense whatsoever, so she's sticking him with a D rank. Lucas looks like he just got slapped. He starts yelling that he's gonna report this to his dad, but she just floats him away with earth magic like a misbehaving toddler. After all that drama, it's finally Arthur's turn. As he steps into the arena, a heavy, intimidating energy starts pouring out of him. The referee instantly gets on guard because he wasn't expecting this level of presence from a newbie. But then Caspian steps in, telling the referee to back off because he's going to handle this one himself. The referee protests, saying a double A ranker like him shouldn't be testing rookies, but Caspian just shrugs it off, saying he's doing this as a favor for Jasmine. Arthur gets into position while Caspian draws his sword, realizing that this guy is probably the strongest fighter in the whole city, and this isn't just some entry-level spar. But that just gets Arthur more pumped, and he charges forward to prove himself. Arthur lights up his blade with fire magic and goes at Caspian, who blocks without breaking a sweat. They start going back and forth, exchanging fast strikes. Caspian notices Arthur's movements are a little rough, like his skills are ahead of what his body can actually keep up with. Arthur suddenly spots an opening and tries to go in for the strike, but Caspian disappears from in front of him and reappears behind, forcing Arthur to back off. Arthur kicks things up with a fire-boosted dash and attacks again, but Caspian responds with a gust of wind magic that shoves him away, warning him not to let his confidence get the better of him. In the end, Arthur passes and is officially ranked as a B-rank adventurer, walking out with his license in hand. But at that exact moment, the higher-ups in the guild corner Caspian be curious they pissed that more than 2 kids walked out with B ranks in one day. Caspian reminds them that about 6 months ago, the ban on elves and dwarves becoming adventurers was lifted. That seems to explain a lot, and the top brass finally gets it. Almost every kid who got B rank today has either elven or dwarven blood in them. Lucas, for example, is a half-elf from a family known for pulling all kinds of stunts to raise powerhouse mages. The geek who didn't even take the test turns out to be human, but he grew up in the Dwarven Kingdom and had some serious high-up connections, which is why even Caspian couldn't step in to evaluate him. The guild officials are worried about what kind of backlash that could bring, but one of the knights is more curious about Arthur. Caspian tells them he honestly doesn't know much about the guy, but he's certain that Arthur isn't an elf or a dwarf. What he does know is that he's strong, and more importantly, Jasmine, the daughter of the kingdom's most powerful fire magic family, is backing him. Caspian admits Arthur's fire spells are solid, but his swordsmanship is on another level. If he keeps sharpening that, he'll become a real force in the adventurer world. At the same time, Arthur himself starts thinking the same thing. He's been pouring too much time into magic lately, and it's time he focused more on improving his sword skills if he wants to level up. As he steps out of the guild, he accidentally bumps into Elijah the Geek from earlier, who immediately starts talking. He says it was pretty reckless of Arthur to interfere with Lucas's match like that. Then he adds that he would have stepped in anyway if Arthur hadn't. That's when Lucas shows up, asking what they're whispering about, but neither Arthur nor Elijah has any time for him. Lucas gets irritated, thinking he's just as powerful as they are. Arthur casually throws shade, telling him that a D ranker should stay in his own lane and not bother B rank adventurers. Lucas grabs his collar in anger, but since a bunch of people are watching, he decides to drop it and walk away. After that, Jasmine takes Arthur to the usual spot where rookie adventurers kick off their journeys. But she already knows Arthur's way past that level, and she admits their real target is much farther out. She suddenly bolts ahead, and Arthur struggles to keep up. He's caught off guard by how fast Jasmine can run, so this is the second time today someone has thrown him off. Earlier during the test, he underestimated Caspian a bit, and now he's starting to feel like he's slipping. Right then, a loud explosion echoes from the woods, and out of nowhere, a massive armored boar charges through. Everyone nearby freaks out and starts running, but a few unlucky adventurers don't make it, and they get mauled by the beast. Jasmine tells Arthur they need to retreat, explaining that this kind of monster isn't even supposed to exist in this region. Just a bit further down the path, they come across a wounded group of merchants lying beside a busted-up cage. Jasmine figures out that the boar was probably being transported somewhere, but it must have broken loose. All of a sudden, the boar crashes into their location and charges right at them. Arthur and Jasmine avoid the attack, but then the beast whips out its long tongue like a spear. They avoid that too, and Jasmine rushes in to counter, landing a hit that barely leaves a scratch. Then out of nowhere, the boar charges the tree she's leaning against, and she has to jump away without even getting a chance to steady herself. So Arthur quickly uses wind magic to close the gap and pull her out of danger just in time. At the same time, the boar sets its sights on the wounded adventurers nearby, and Jasmine jumps in to shield them. Arthur wants to help right away, but something inside tells him not to rush in and to handle this the right way. He forces himself to stay calm, waiting for the right moment. Just as the boar charges at Jasmine again, ignoring everything else around it, Arthur bolts forward using wind magic. He coats his blade in fire, drives it into the boar's body to stop it cold, and then follows up with a flurry of hard-hitting strikes until it finally goes down. Later on, while the adventurers haul the boar's corpse away, Jasmine scolds Arthur for acting too calm during the fight, and he doesn't even get why she's upset this time. That night, while they're camped out by the fire, Jasmine finally opens up and says she became an adventurer to escape her home. Her family's full of famous fire mages, and they're all super proud of that legacy. She awakened her mana core before any of her siblings, and her parents thought she was going to be the best of them. But when it turned out she couldn't use fire magic, they branded her a failure, a shame to the family, and that crushed her. Arthur's pissed the moment she says that, telling her that no element is better than another, and it's all about how you use it. Jasmine laughs when she sees how fired up he gets and says she never thought he'd lose his temper over something like this. Arthur's a little flustered, but the truth is, in his past life, people used to call him worthless too. He just worked his ass off to prove them wrong. Then Jasmine tells him that she used to charge into fights without thinking too, just like he did today. But back then, her teammates chewed her out for it. They taught her to rely on others more, to fight as a team, and they helped her grow into someone better. After that, Jasmine dozes off while Arthur stays up to keep watch. He starts thinking about whether he can really change too. He thinks about all the people in his life he wants to protect, and promises himself that he'll do whatever it takes, change as much as he needs to make sure he can keep them secure. Arthur and Jasmine set off shoulder to shoulder, beginning their mission together. And after traveling a certain distance, they step down from the carriage and take a moment to go over the details of their objective. Arthur reviews everything once more, confirming that all contact with the nearby village has been completely cut off and that they were sent to find out what exactly happened there. He makes it clear that their absolute top priority throughout this mission is staying alive, and since the quest briefing never once mentioned eliminating any threats, if they happen to encounter a dangerous beast along the way, there is no reason at all for them to get involved with it foolishly. Arthur then glances at Sylvie, who is perched comfortably on his shoulder, and asks what she intends to do while he is off dealing with the quest. Sylvie casually replies that she will be training somewhere close by until he returns, so Arthur assures her that he will inform her the second he is back. With that sorted, he and Jasmine continue toward the village. But after walking for some time, they both notice something unsettling. Numerous footprints head straight into the village, yet hardly any tracks come back out. Given the circumstances, they both realize their smartest move is to collect as much information as possible before rushing in, so they begin cautiously surveying the outskirts, slipping through brush, and peering past bushes to better understand what might be waiting inside. After spending a fair amount of time observing, they still see no trace of any villagers, which makes Arthur start considering the possibility that a beast may have attacked and wiped them out. Jasmine, however, is not fully convinced, pointing out that there are no clear signs of a struggle or destruction in the area. Just then, they sense a peculiar aura radiating from somewhere deeper within the village, and without wasting another moment, they decide to enter and investigate directly. Inside, they are met with a shocking sight. Several luminous cyan crystals rise from the ground in scattered locations. When they approach for a closer inspection, their shock deepens as they realize that actual villagers are sealed inside each one. The sight leaves both of them momentarily speechless. As if that were not strange enough, they soon encounter a young girl who appears completely unaffected by the crystal phenomenon. They stop her and ask what occurred, and she explains through shaky breaths that she had been out gathering medicinal herbs when everything suddenly happened, only returning to find everyone she knows trapped and frozen in those glowing prisms. Overwhelmed, the girl collapses into tears at the horrifying scene before her. From everything they have seen and learned up to this point, Arthur is certain of one thing. This has to be the doing of some kind of monster. Out of nowhere, a strand of webbing snaps through the air and latches onto the girl's leg, yanking her off the ground and hauling her upward as a massive spider-like monster creeps forward, ready to swallow her whole. Arthur reacts on instinct and lunges to rescue her, but Jasmine quickly grabs him and holds him back before he can rush in. Instead of devouring the girl, the creature encases her inside one of the glowing crystals and lowers her back to the ground. It then shifts its focus entirely onto Arthur and Jasmine, attempting to snare them next, but both of them slip away from its attack with ease. Moments later, they decide to retreat, since their mission briefing never once involved hunting down or defeating any monsters in the first place. Elsewhere at that very same moment, two individuals clad in hooded cloaks stand across from each other in a dimly lit chamber, a map spread out between them. They discuss the threefold alliance of humans, dwarves, and elves, viewing it as a highly unfavorable balance of power from their perspective. One of them, however, remarks that history follows a natural current, and sometimes allowing events to flow as they will can lead to unexpectedly satisfying outcomes. He then activates something marked as a beast glade on the map, causing a sphere of glowing green energy to materialize above it. Miniature projections of the most formidable and dangerous adventurers then appear across the map's surface. After examining what lies ahead, the two cloaked figures agree that this future must be stopped no matter the cost. And judging by the intensity of their reactions to each projection, it becomes obvious that the ones they fear most are Arthur and Jasmine. At the same time, Arthur and Jasmine have successfully put distance between themselves and the spider beast, though Arthur is still trying to process what exactly that creature was. Jasmine explains that it is called an arachnid, a monster ranked among the 5 beasts she has always dreaded encountering. In her entire life, she has only faced 5 of them and managed to bring down just one. And even that victory required the combined effort of the entire Twin Horns party, which leaves Arthur genuinely stunned. She continues, mentioning that Ray and Alice were both present during that battle, and that Alice's emitter abilities proved absolutely vital to their survival. The curse inflicted by an arachnid can only be lifted by an emitter, or by killing the arachnid itself. To make matters worse, these creatures possess an extremely high resistance to magic, rendering most spells practically useless against them. After hearing all of that, Arthur finally understands why Jasmine stopped him earlier. She already knew they stood little to no chance in a direct confrontation. Jasmine confirms this and adds that arachnid cannot tolerate sunlight very well, which is why they usually remain hidden deep within forests or buried inside dungeons. With that in mind, she acknowledges that she has already taught him everything essential about surviving as an adventurer, then turns the question back on him and asks what he believes their next move should be. Arthur pauses to think it through and decides the smartest call is to head straight back to the guild and file a full report on what they discovered. But in the very next instant, the arachnid materializes right behind them and casts its snare magic, trying to lock them down and transform them. Jasmine slams Arthur out of harm's way at the final second, leaving herself trapped inside the glowing circle alone, and moments later she is encased within a crystal prison. The arachnid immediately charges at Arthur, yet he snaps his blade up just in time to intercept the strike. As he strains against the impact, his thoughts slip back to his previous life, when he stood as a king hailed as the strongest warrior alive. That memory ignites something fierce inside him, and he unloads everything he has on the monster. But just as Jasmine had cautioned, his swords lack the power to inflict meaningful damage. He springs backward onto a tree branch and reassesses, realizing steel alone will not win this fight, so he releases his grip and unleashes his blade and flame technique, striking with magic instead, and this time, the attacks visibly wound it. Eventually, Arthur starts to believe the barrage has finally put it down, yet to his disbelief, the arachne drags itself back up and regenerates, which does not entirely surprise him since Jasmine warned him about its overwhelming resistance to magic. Taking that into account, Arthur fires off his rock arrow technique, sending multiple stone spikes plunging deep into the arachne's body. Enraged, it hurtles toward him, but Arthur evades cleanly and lands atop it, driving his sword into the opening the stone spines carved out. He then channels magic into the embedded spikes, triggering them from within and unleashing a violent surge of lightning that rips through the creature. After enduring the relentless current for several long seconds, the arachne finally collapses. Arthur steps off and turns toward Jasmine, only to find her still sealed within the crystal. And the reason quickly becomes clear: the arachne is not dead yet. It swivels its magic eye toward him, but Arthur halts time before its spell can activate. As he advances, he murmurs a quiet word of gratitude to the arachne. It is because of this brutal clash that he remembered how to wield his sword the way he once did in his former life. With composed precision, he lifts his blade and cuts cleanly through the arachne in a single flawless stroke, ending it instantly. Even so, the strain of that technique is etched across his body. He understands he must still learn how to fuse his old combat mastery with the new magic he has gained in this world. He sinks to one knee to steady his breathing, and that is when Sylvie rushes over, asking what just happened since she sensed a surge of fierce anger erupt from him earlier, but Arthur reassures her that he is fine. Jasmine and the others seem to have shaken off the curse, but Jasmine's expression makes it painfully clear that she is far from impressed with him. Arthur admits he was wrong and apologizes for rushing in to fight the arachne after she had clearly warned him not to. Hearing that, Jasmine decides there is no reason to keep holding on to her anger since he has already taken responsibility. Even so, she cannot hide how stunned she is that he actually managed to defeat it completely on his own. Still, Arthur explains that this is not the kind of strength he is chasing. What he truly wants is the strength to shield the people who matter most to him. He confesses that it was his own lack of power that almost led to him losing his family, and he understands that nothing can undo what has already happened. And because of that, he swears to grow stronger than ever before. Jasmine still reprimands him for gambling with his life like that, but Arthur tells her she matters to him too, and that he would risk everything to keep her safe, which causes her cheeks to flush. After some time, they return to the guild, and news of Arthur slaying the arachne spreads quickly. Lucas refuses to believe it and demands that Arthur show the mana core as evidence, but Arthur realizes that will not be happening since Sylvie devoured the mana core right after the battle ended. Even so, Arthur summons the arachne's cursed eye of petrification, and Lucas is completely at a loss when he sees it because he has never laid eyes on something like that before. Despite that, Lucas keeps up his usual pride and claims that even this arachne would not have posed any real challenge for him, before turning and walking away. With that matter handled, Arthur returns to the family estate to see his loved ones. Eleanor in particular is beyond thrilled to watch him step back through the door safely. He tells his father about defeating an arachne, and Ray looks sincerely impressed. His mother, however, is nowhere near pleased and orders Arthur to kneel while reminding him that before becoming an adventurer, he promised not to throw himself into danger. Arthur argues that avoiding danger entirely is not realistic for someone in his line of work, but his mother refuses to listen and insists he honor his word. Ray does not make too much of a fuss and simply advises Arthur to follow Jasmine's guidance from now on. Jasmine reassures him that she has already reported everything properly to the guild. Ray then gently tells Alice to stop crying and try to smile because the most important thing is that Arthur came home alive. Alice steadies herself and tells Arthur never to make her worry like that again. Once things calm down, Arthur and Jasmine head to the training grounds and engage in a no-magic sparring match. They trade blows with their batons for quite some time and seem perfectly matched the entire session. When it ends, they bow respectfully and thank each other for the bout. Arthur then lifts his gaze to the sky and lets his thoughts drift, wondering what Tessia might be doing at this moment. And then we see that Tessia and her group are sprinting for their lives as a massive boulder barrels after them. The following morning, Tessia and her companions gather in a small tavern, discussing their next move. After weighing their options, Tessia announces that their upcoming mission is to track down wild boars. Her teammates grow uneasy, knowing the hunt will happen within human lands. They debate the risks for a bit, but in the end, they agree to move forward and start getting ready. As Tessia steps outside, one of the adventurers slyly stretches his leg out to make her stumble, yet she reacts in an instant and sends him stumbling back with a sharp kick. The mood inside the tavern turns hostile as the other adventurers rise, prepared to strike. But without hesitation, Tessia and her group conjure a wall of water that cages the men inside, buying themselves just enough time to slip away. Not long after, a carriage pulls up, and they climb aboard to set off. The journey begins peacefully, almost too peacefully. Suddenly, a band of mounted bandits storms toward them and attempts to raid the carriage. Tessia and her party counterattack swiftly and overpower them with little effort. It becomes clear that the bond between elves, humans, and dwarves has been strained by decades of hostility. A formal pact was established among the three kingdoms to halt the wars, yet that peace exists only on paper. The common folk still cling to resentment and suspicion, leaving the harmony fragile at best. As the group presses on, more humans attempt to ambush and seize them. From afar, a hooded figure observes the unfolding events through a mystical map. At the same time, Tessia and the others begin questioning why they are constant targets. They soon understand that elves fetch a high price, making them prime prey. Despite the danger tightening around them, Tessia refuses to retreat. She proposes abandoning the carriage and finishing the trip on foot instead. While traveling, Faye grows anxious, fearing that humans despise them and will continue to drive them away even when they only mean to offer help. But Tessia refuses to accept that belief. Before long, they reach a nearby village, yet the chief wastes no time ordering them out solely because of their race. Elsewhere, Arthur sits quietly in a tavern, keeping an eye on Lucas. He pieces together that Lucas's household ranks among the most influential in the Sappan kingdom, which makes their elvish lineage rather intriguing. At that moment, Lucas approaches Elijah and mocks him, questioning what ties a mere human could possibly have with dwarf royalty. The remark makes Elijah pause, wondering how much Lucas truly knows. Maintaining his composure, Elijah replies that the matter is complicated, adding that he has noticed Lucas carries elven blood as well. Lucas admits that the Wykes family's goal has always been to cultivate exceptional mages. But before he can elaborate, Arthur cuts in, stating that the Wykes openly accept elves skilled in mana control, regardless of human prejudice. Arthur considers whether the family is forward-thinking or simply driven enough to chase power at any cost. Lucas then forms a blazing fireball in his palm and declares that he will wield his strength so that no one across the entire continent of Dicathan can rival him as the supreme mage. He insists it is his obligation as a Wykes, but Arthur responds with little more than a calm wish of good fortune. Lucas blinks at the laid-back reaction, prompting Arthur to explain that their ambitions now differ since he no longer seeks to be the strongest, and the statement leaves both Elijah and Lucas momentarily stunned. Shortly afterward, Jasmine enters and informs Arthur that their next assignment has arrived. She cautions that it will demand a lengthy journey, but Arthur simply smiles, thinking it sounds like an adventure worth taking. At the same time, Tessia and her party move around town trying to collect details about the mana beasts that have started appearing nearby. But no one is willing to share a single thing with them, so Tessia grows frustrated, and her emotions finally spill over as she ends up breaking into tears. Faye, however, is not shocked at all, because he knows elves would respond the exact same way if humans wandered into their homeland asking questions. Out of nowhere, an acorn smacks Tessia on the head. She glances up and notices a few kids peeking at her from afar. She's ready to snap at them, but instead they end up offering something genuinely helpful. The boar has been showing up from the east, and that piece of information leaves everyone stunned. At the same time, the shadowy figures continue observing Tessia through a magical map. They conclude that Tessia herself is not the real issue, but who she is destined to become matters greatly, especially since she is the princess of the Eleanor Kingdom. They believe eliminating her would deal a serious blow to the fragile three-way treaty, so they begin setting their plan to strike her into motion. At that very moment, a massive mana beast suddenly emerges and charges straight at them, launching a direct assault, but they barely manage to leap out of the way in time. They regroup instantly and unleash attack after attack, striking it repeatedly with everything they have. After pouring so much power into it, they are convinced they must have defeated it. But to their disbelief, The creature is still standing like nothing happened. They bombard it with magic again, yet this time their spells do absolutely nothing, because the boar has adjusted and raised a protective shield that blocks every attack they send its way. This entire confrontation was deliberately orchestrated by the hooded figures, whose true goal is to shatter the three-way treaty by ensuring Tessia dies on human soil. Tessia and her team quickly realize their magic is no longer effective, so they abandon offense and focus on sprinting and evading as quickly as possible. But amid the chaos, Vio is suddenly struck by a chunk of flying debris, which knocks her off her feet and sends her tumbling right in front of the boar. Fortunately, Faye reacts in an instant and uses his water magic to yank Vio away, pulling her back to his side before disaster can strike. Faye recommends that they withdraw and retreat, but that is when Tessia suddenly forms a strategy. The first move is for Faye to serve as bait, so he rushes forward and splashes the boar with water magic to draw its attention and lure it after him. Once it reaches the perfect spot, Vio activates her earth magic and cracks open the ground beneath it, causing the boar to drop down and become trapped inside the pit. With it stuck below, Tessia uses her telekinesis to raise a mass of rocks and slam them down on top of the mana beast, locking it in place. Tessia exhales in relief, convinced the fight is finally over, but the mana beast bursts free from the pit and charges toward Faye and Veo, ready to smash into them. Tessia catches sight of it just in time and sweeps them out of harm's way with her wind magic before it can hit. She steadies herself and thinks about her decision, realizing that protecting her teammates in that instant was simply the only choice, the same choice Arthur would have made. The memory of Arthur pulls her into a rush of shared moments from their past together. She drifts for a second, distracted by those thoughts, but Faye doesn't hesitate, pulling her back with water magic just before she can be caught in the beast's next strike. Faye and Veo recommend falling back and withdrawing, but Tessia refuses to budge and insists on finishing the mana beast herself. She quickly realizes her mana is completely drained, and she has nothing left to cast, yet a lesson Arthur once showed her flashes through her mind, so she plants her feet, calms her breathing, and starts pulling mana from the air, the ground, everything surrounding her. The mana then beast barrels toward her at full speed, and she answers with one solid punch that knocks it flat in a single blow. Faye and Veo stare in stunned silence, understanding that she managed it by channeling the gathered mana inward and reinforcing her body from within. The cloaked observers watch everything unfold and conclude that Tessia is far stronger than they initially calculated, so they decide that next time they will return with an even more formidable mana beast to handle her. After dealing with the creature, Tessia and her team head to inform the village chief that the threat has been eliminated, yet the chief cannot even spare a word of gratitude, which clearly annoys Tessia. Faye calmly tells her not to expect politeness from humans and to brush it off, but then they notice the same children from earlier, and the kids sincerely thank them for getting rid of the boar. At the same time, Virion sits down with Cynthia and explains that he has been secretly monitoring Tessia, mentioning how close she came to losing control during her battle with the mana beast. Cynthia is hardly shocked, considering Tessia is Virion's granddaughter, but Virion confesses that while he would love to claim responsibility for her growth, he truly believes her strength comes from loyal companions like Arthur who always remain at her side. Sometime later, Tessia and the others settle into a diner, and Tessia mentions that she and Faye will soon be returning to Xyrus. They turn to Vio and ask about her plans, and she says she intends to travel to Xyrus as well since she would like to see Arthur again. Tessia is completely taken aback by that and asks how Vio even knows Arthur, so Vio explains that she previously traveled to Xyrus with him. Tessia has not seen Arthur at all since his departure, mainly because she never learned where exactly in Xyrus he ended up. Before long, Tessia finds herself standing before Arthur's family estate, her nerves rising with every second, as she rehearses what she might say when she finally faces him. Suddenly, Alice and Eleanor rush toward her out of nowhere, catching Tessia completely off guard. She panics in embarrassment and bolts away in a fluster, still desperately trying to pinpoint Arthur's exact whereabouts. Arthur is later shown lying unconscious along the edge of a deserted island, and after some time passes, he pushes himself up, still groggy, trying to piece together how the hell he even ended up here. He breaks into a run across the shoreline and nearby terrain, scanning everything around him, desperate to understand where he is and which way he should head. As he moves, fragments of memory suddenly rush back to him. He remembers paddling a canoe with Jasmine, the water calm 1 second, and then chaos the next, when a gigantic tsunami rose out of nowhere. That monstrous wave slammed into them and tore them apart, separating them in an instant. The memory hits him clearly, and without hesitation, he starts searching frantically for Jasmine. While rushing through the area, he unexpectedly comes across Lucas and Elijah, both sprawled on the ground and completely soaked in seawater. Arthur quickly explains how he ended up on the island, and Lucas and Elijah begin sharing their own stories so they can figure out what happened to each of them. Arthur says he had accepted a request from the Halsey family to subdue a mana beast, but during that mission he got trapped in a brutal storm while traveling. Elijah then reveals that he had been dispatched by the guild after several fishing boats mysteriously vanished near the farmland coast, and he was assigned to uncover the reason behind those disappearances. During that investigation, he too was swallowed up by the same violent storm. Lucas never openly states how he arrived there, but Arthur and Elijah can already tell that his pride won't let him admit he was dragged in by the storm just like they did. Once they finish exchanging details, the three of them start discussing how they're going to escape the island. They all come to the same obvious conclusion: they'll need to either locate a usable boat or build one themselves if they want to leave safely. Even so, Arthur's mind remains fixed on Jasmine, and he struggles to fully concentrate on any escape strategy. Deep down, though, he holds on to a firm belief that if he managed to survive that nightmare of a storm, then Jasmine must have survived too and is somewhere close by. Arthur then reaches out telepathically to Sylvie and carefully explains everything that has happened. He asks her to search the surrounding sea and nearby waters for any trace of Jasmine, hoping they can find each other as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Jasmine is shown standing on a distant stretch of shoreline, far from where Arthur ended up. She shouts his name over and over, but the only thing that answers her is silence. After calling out for a while, her strength fades and she slowly drops to her knees, guilt flooding her thoughts as she blames herself for everything, insisting that the separation was her fault. Her mind drifts back to an earlier conversation she once had with Ray, and in that memory, Ray warned her that adventurers who accept missions often encounter threats far beyond what the official details claim. And after hearing that, Jasmine started suspecting that guilds might be underestimating how dangerous their requests truly are. Ray admitted that this could be true, but he also offered another possibility. He suggested that someone, or perhaps an organized group, might be deliberately interfering with the three-way treaty and staging these incidents on purpose. Even so, Ray understood that no amount of warning would stop Arthur from taking on missions and chasing new challenges, so instead of trying to hold him back, he asked Jasmine to stay especially vigilant whenever she traveled with Arthur, to keep a close eye on him and protect him as best she could. Jasmine accepted his request without hesitation and promised that she would remain cautious and watch over Arthur no matter what. Back in the present, Jasmine pushes herself up and resumes searching for him. Before long, she runs into two of Lucas's guards. They explain how they were swept away and stranded, and as the conversation continues, both men break down in tears after realizing they have been entirely isolated from Lucas. At the same time, Lucas pulls out camping gear from his dimensional ring. Arthur stares in disbelief, as it is the first time he has ever witnessed a dimensional ring being used in person. Together, they set up a tent and prepare a simple sleeping area. Food, however, is scarce, so Arthur heads into the forest to gather whatever he can find. He returns with fish and mushrooms to make a meal, then asks Lucas to take care of the cooking since he can use fire magic. Lucas agrees, but his first attempts are rough, burning the fish one moment and leaving it undercooked the next. And after several tries, he gradually finds the right balance and finally manages to grill a proper fish, but at the cost of many burnt fish. And once everything is ready, the three of them sit around the campfire and share their meal. As Arthur eats beside Lucas and Elijah, the warmth of the fire and the quiet atmosphere remind him of the evenings he once spent with his family. Despite being stranded on an unknown island, the moment carries a strange sense of comfort and familiarity that steadies his heart. The following morning, Arthur tells them that while he was out collecting food the previous day, he also took time to explore and survey the island. From everything he saw, it seems they are the only ones stranded there. He also discovered the wrecked boats that Lucas and Elijah had washed ashore on, but those vessels are far too damaged to be repaired or used for escape. After laying out everything he learned, Arthur presents two possible courses of action. The first is to remain where they are and wait for rescue, adding confidently that Jasmine will surely come searching for him sooner or later. The second is to attempt leaving the island on their own. He explains that the mainland does not appear to be very far, so making the journey themselves could be achievable. But Lucas suddenly cuts him off, insisting that neither idea will succeed. He pulls out a scroll and reveals the target of his mission. The creature in question is a mana beast capable of manipulating the weather, though only within a limited range. Lucas explains that as long as that beast is alive, any attempt to cross the sea would end in disaster based on the information he has gathered. He is convinced the creature is hiding somewhere on the island. With determination burning in his eyes, he declares that he will reduce it to ashes and immediately sets off. Arthur quickly stops him and suggests they face it together, pointing out that fighting as a team is safer and far more effective than going in alone, and Lucas agrees as long as they don't hold him back. Meanwhile, Sylvie finally succeeds in locating Jasmine and informs her that Arthur is still alive. Relief washes over Jasmine, filling her with renewed hope, but she understands that she cannot afford to lose another second and must hurry to reunite with him. Meanwhile, Arthur, Lucas, and Elijah arrive near the suspected location of the mana beast and conceal themselves as they carefully discuss their strategy. Lucas initiates the attack by hurling a blazing fireball into the cave, but instead of striking cleanly, the blast triggers a violent reaction, sending shards of rock and debris exploding outward toward them. Elijah reacts instantly, raising a sturdy wall of earth to shield Lucas from the flying rubble. Lucas briefly feels a surge of confidence, assuming that his fireball has already eliminated the beast. But in the next instant, the cave begins to crumble, and the mana beast emerges in its full form. Without hesitation, it launches a powerful sphere of energy at them, which Arthur deflects with his blade. Lucas momentarily freezes in fear, panic creeping into his expression, yet he quickly steadies himself, unwilling to let Arthur see him falter. Arthur then rushes forward, charging straight at the beast while Elijah provides support from the rear. He unleashes a rapid series of sword strikes, but none of them leave lasting damage. The creature's wounds close almost immediately, regenerating as if nothing had happened. Realizing this, Arthur's mind races for a solution, and he suddenly instructs Elijah and Lucas to switch positions with him, a command that catches both of them completely off guard. Elijah steps up to the front beside Arthur, taking point, while Lucas hangs back in a long-range support position. Arthur slashes forward with his blade, and at the same moment Elijah summons several jagged pillars of earth that burst from the ground and pin sections of the creature's body in place. They use those spikes to pack in and seal the wounds it already suffered, locking the damage down tight. Arthur quickly notices a key detail. When the creature is restrained like that, its regeneration slows to a crawl, so they run the exact tactic again. Arthur strikes first, then Elijah calls up more earthen spikes to plug and seal the fresh injuries. This coordinated combo finally seems strong enough to drop the mana beast for good. Arthur and Elijah exchange a sharp high five in celebration, while Lucas insists he carried most of the fight from the back line. But the mood shifts fast when the mana beast suddenly twitches instead of staying down. It jerks back to life and starts moving again. Arthur grits his teeth and rushes it once more, already feeling his stamina running thin and wondering how much longer he can keep this up. Right then, Jasmine appears. She races across the island at incredible speed and catches sight of Arthur from afar. Pushing herself even harder, she surges straight toward him. Just as Arthur prepares to deliver another blow, Jasmine arrives and ends the fight with a single overwhelming strike that cuts his damned head off, ending it for real this time. She then immediately runs over to Arthur and checks if he is hurt. Elijah and Lucas can only stare, completely floored by how effortlessly she erased the beast in one clean hit. As the sun begins to set, Jasmine quietly apologizes to Arthur for everything that happened and admits she is sorry things spiraled out of control. Arthur brushes it off and tells her it is fine, saying he is simply thankful she showed up when it mattered most. Off to the side, Elijah and Lucas are scrambling after Sylvie, who has snatched the beast's mana core. They chase her down, but they are too slow. But before either of them can grab her, Sylvie pops the mana core into her mouth and swallows it whole. Back in Xyris, Tesha reunites with her team. She explains that she still has not managed to see Arthur, and somehow they keep missing each other every time. Faye and Vio start teasing that maybe it is not bad timing at all, but nerves. Tesha immediately protests, clearly flustered. She pushes back her chair and leaves without adding another word. Still, Faye and Vio were right, as Tesha is genuinely anxious about facing Arthur. After giving it some thought, she forces herself to gather her resolve and heads to his house. She pauses outside the door, hesitating as she debates whether to knock. Just as she finally moves to step inside, she bumps straight into Ray. Mortified, Tesha turns bright red and bolts away, leaving Ray standing there, puzzled about what just happened. Elsewhere, we see several hooded figures huddle over an enchanted map, preparing for the day of reckoning as they carefully search for a creature powerful enough to unleash. Not long after, Arthur and Jasmine walk out of the Adventurers Guild together. As they move down the street, Arthur admits he was honestly shocked by how quickly she showed up earlier while they were battling that monster. Jasmine shrugs it off and says it was nothing special, explaining that she simply concentrated her wind mana into her feet to boost her speed. At that moment, a tall blonde man approaches and greets Jasmine. Arthur doesn't recognize him, so Jasmine introduces him as Brauld, a AA rank adventurer, and Brauld looks clearly pleased that she knows exactly who he is. He explains that he came to request her help because he recently uncovered information about a highly valuable treasure. Arthur watches the exchange carefully and realizes that Brauld is also a AA rank adventurer. Just like Jasmine, he knows that anyone at that level has to be incredibly capable. Still, for reasons he can't quite explain, seeing Brauld standing so close to Jasmine leaves Arthur with a strange sense of discomfort. Afterward, Arthur heads to the training grounds to spar with Adam. Before the match begins, he recalls their previous fight and quietly wonders how things will play out this time. Once the duel starts, Adam quickly shows how formidable he is. Throughout the clash, Adam controls the pace and overpowers Arthur in multiple exchanges. Even so, Adam points out that Arthur has grown a lot since their last bout and openly acknowledges his progress. Arthur takes the praise with a nod and thanks him sincerely. After the session ends, a few of the other adventurers approach Arthur and inform him of his next training rotation. He is scheduled to practice archery, followed by sessions focused on earth and wind magic. Arthur accepts the plan without hesitation, making it clear he is fully committed to getting stronger. At the same time, Rhys seems uneasy and unable to relax. His thoughts keep drifting back to Arthur and how he is handling his training. Jasmine notices his mood and asks if he wants to personally check in on Arthur, but Ray brushes the idea aside and tells her to drop it. He then asks her what she originally wanted to talk about, and Jasmine brings up Brauld and asks if Ray knows anything about him. Ray explains that Brauld has earned his reputation by fighting on the front lines, regularly taking on the most dangerous assignments during missions, and even with that risk, he manages to complete the majority of his quests without suffering any wounds. Jasmine then asks what kind of person Brauld really is, and Ray replies that Brauld is surprisingly calm and laid back, but undeniably powerful. He even admits that facing Brauld alone in a one-on-one fight would be a serious challenge, even for him. Jasmine then informs Ray that Brauld asked her to team up with him on an upcoming mission. Ray thinks that is odd, especially considering Brauld already has a full squad of his own. Jasmine explains that it is not only her, since Brauld has been reaching out to several different adventurers, and because of that, they start going over possible explanations. They figure Brauld could be searching for substitutes if some of his teammates were hurt, or maybe his party has fallen apart entirely. Still, Ray cautions her not to assume anything without solid facts. Keeping that in mind, Jasmine chooses to dig deeper and says she will check into it herself. And as she gets ready to head out, Ray stops her and reminds her to make sure Arthur is taken care of. At the same time, Arthur and the rest of the adventurers are drained after a brutal and exhausting day of drills. Even so, Ray steps up and says he wants to spar with Arthur to strengthen their connection, but Alice and Eleanor quickly step in, insisting that Arthur has already pushed himself enough and should not overdo it, which leaves Ray a bit irritated. Afterward, Arthur realizes Jasmine is nowhere in sight and asks about her. Ray tells him she stepped out to handle something, but he will stick around and spend time with them for now. Arthur says that works for him, though despite saying that, he quietly thinks things over. These kinds of family moments still feel foreign to him, and as he watches his family, he wonders how much time will pass before scenes like this begin to feel normal. Meanwhile, at the Adventurers Guild, Lucas is annoyed because there are no worthwhile quests available. His guards explain that after the recent chaos, many adventurers have lost their lives, and because of that, the guild has become stricter and is carefully reviewing every new request before posting it. Lucas had planned to clear a few more missions before entering the academy, but given the current circumstances, he starts questioning whether that will happen at all. At that moment, Shen walks up and reveals that Brauld is quietly gathering members for a strike on a newly discovered high-level dungeon, and that the entire operation is being concealed from the guild. Shen adds that someone with Lucas' power would easily earn a spot in the group, but the moment Lucas hears this, his companions immediately protest. They caution him that the task sounds reckless and urge him to stay away. Lucas shuts them down without hesitation and orders them to keep quiet, making it obvious he has already made up his mind. As he strides off to track down Brauld and secure a position, The expression on Shinnen's face alone makes it clear he is scheming to throw Lucas straight into danger. Meanwhile, Arthur heads out with Alice to shop for new outfits for Eleanor. Even though the trip is meant to be pleasant, Alice quickly notices that Arthur is still carrying himself in a stiff and overly serious way. She tells him to loosen up and actually enjoy the moment. Deep down, however, Arthur admits to himself that he would rather be battling a mana beast than walking through stores picking out clothes. At the same time, Tessia and her teammates sit together at an open-air cafe, sipping tea. Vio and Faye are amazed that Tessia still has not managed to run into Arthur, even though they have come so close several times. They start joking that maybe destiny keeps pulling them apart. Tessia rejects that idea immediately, saying it cannot be fate because she misses him far too much. Faye then asks if Varian has assigned them another mission yet, and Tessia explains that they must wait for the ongoing investigations to conclude before receiving new orders. Vio says she does not mind the delay, as she would prefer not to stumble into another dangerous mana beast unprepared. At that same moment, Arthur is walking home with Alice and Eleanor. Vio suddenly spots him from a distance, which makes Tessia's heart leap, but just as Tessia turns her head to see him, a passing carriage blocks her line of sight. By the time it rolls past, Arthur has already disappeared, causing Tessia to miss him once again. Afterward, Arthur stops by a mystic merchant shop because he wants to purchase a dimensional ring. Inside, he runs into Helen and Angela. He browses the displayed items, but their prices are far beyond what he can afford right now, so he decides to return once he has saved more money. Not long after, Alice and Eleanor step into the store and scold Arthur for slipping away without telling them. Arthur apologizes for wandering off and rejoins them without protest. And by the end of the day, Arthur finally makes it home and drops onto his bed. Completely drained, he speaks with Sylvie and vents about how exhausting all the family activities have been. He admits that although he genuinely cares about Alice and Eleanor, this kind of peaceful domestic routine still feels unfamiliar to him. Sylvie, meanwhile, is full of excitement and can hardly wait for their next adventure. She asks Arthur when their following quest will begin, and Arthur explains that because of recent events, adventurers are currently on hold, so it may take a while before any new assignments are handed out. As he continues talking with Sylvie, it dawns on him that almost 2 years have passed since he became an adventurer, even though he was only meant to stay in that role until enrolling in Cyrus Academy. And with that time limit approaching, he starts thinking that whatever quest comes next will probably be his final one before he moves on. Arthur starts thinking about how Jasmine might react to his decision, so he goes to look for her to talk it through. When he arrives, he finds Alice and Eleanor helping Jasmine try on a beautiful new outfit. Jasmine immediately turns red the moment Arthur sees her dressed like that. Arthur casually tells her she looks adorable, but instead of answering, Jasmine bolts out of the room, completely flustered. Still wanting to speak with her, Arthur waits until she changes back into her usual clothes, then finds her and asks to talk in private. He brings up Braul's invitation and asks what she intends to do. Jasmine explains that she has been quietly investigating during her free time, and from what she discovered, Brauld is arranging this mission independently, and none of his regular party members are involved. And because of that, she feels accepting the offer might not be wise, though she can clearly sense that Arthur is thinking about it seriously. Arthur looks back on everything that has happened so far and comes to the conclusion that trying to avoid danger at this point would not really change anything. He tells Jasmine that while he would normally be content taking on small tasks like herb gathering, if this ends up being their last mission together, then it should be something significant and unforgettable. Jasmine understands exactly what he means, and she agrees that going on a simple gathering job would be dull. In the end, she decides to accept the mission and stand by his side. The following morning, Arthur and Jasmine get ready to depart, and their family gathers to send them off. Ray offers Arthur one final reminder, telling him that the most important thing on any quest is making it back alive. He says that as long as Arthur returns safely with Jasmine, they will celebrate no matter how the mission turns out. With those words in mind, Arthur and Jasmine set out. They pass through a teleportation tunnel and emerge in a wide open field, and there Arthur bids Sylvie farewell, promising they will reunite once the mission is complete. After that, he and Jasmine press forward toward their destination. At the same time, the hooded figure is shown completing a summoning ritual. The being he calls forth is overwhelmingly powerful, so much so that he cannot completely control it, so he becomes certain that Arthur and Jasmine will have no chance of surviving against such a monster. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the recap and are excited for the next episode, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our daily recaps.